Hello and welcome to A Grain of Sanderson, a podcast where we are foolishly attempting to read all of Brandon Sanderson's works in publication order. Oh, real foolish. Real foolish. Okay, I am joined by Taylor Lane.
Hello.
And Jack McLaughlin.
Hello.
Oh, and my name is Graham.
Your name is Graham.
It is Graham. At least for now. Where do we begin?
I don't know. So we just finished reading A Gathering Storm, book 12? Question mark?
12.
Book
12, yeah, or 13, depending on how you count.
Book 12 of The Wheel of Time, which is when Brandon Sanderson steps in to finish this long epic fantasy series originally written by Robert Jordan after Robert Jordan got sick with some sort of cancer. I don't actually remember the specific details of it.
He had myeloma, which is a type of bone cancer. Or at least he was receiving treatment for myeloma. I think what he had was technically something different, but the myeloma treatment was effective for it.
Graham will be able to go into way more detail about this a little bit later, since Graham also read a biography about Robert Jordan in prep
I only
for this
got halfway
episode.
through, but
Graham read half a biography of Robert Jordan in preparation for this episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the basic story here is that Robert Jordan was writing this incredibly long epic fantasy series that, for all of our upcoming opinions on it, was a very, very popular fantasy series. And he knew he was dying, or at least got diagnosed, was given not a very long time to live, not nearly long enough to finish his book, especially with him getting sick. And so he and his wife essentially elected Brandon Sanderson heir to the Wheel of Time.
You're already wrong.
Am I already wrong?
Pause.
Yes. Objection.
Oh, okay.
So that's the story that is popular.
Like, if you go on Reddit right now, you will see a million posts with that exact story.
But that is outrageous, because the true story is written by Brandon Sanderson in the first 3 pages of this book. I'm not really sure how this got popular. He made it very clear, explicitly.
Tell the real story then. Regarding the end of the story is that,
or should I?
The end of the story is that Brandon Sanderson wrote the last 3 books of Wheel of Time. So that's why we're starting with book 12 and we're not doing the other books, because those other books were written by Robert Jordan, and this book was a book written by Brandon Sanderson.
You're saying this as if we're going to get new listeners on this episode. People are either going to know us already or just be like, this is insane. So
I don't know.
I don't think we need to. Are you really planning to read the entire foreword?
I don't know. It's like 100 words. I can just read sections from it. The part of the foreword I wanted to read was, in November of 2007, I received a phone call that would change my life forever. Harriet McDougall, wife and editor of the late Robert Jordan, called to ask me if I would complete the last book of The Wheel of Time. For those who did not know, Mr. Jordan had passed away. It pains me to be the one to break the news. I remember how I felt when, idly browsing on the internet in September 16th of 2007, I discovered he had died. I was shocked, stunned, and disheartened. This wonderful man, a hero to me in my writing career, was gone. The world had suddenly become a different place. He doesn't get the call until after Jordan has died. And it's worth noting that there's this story of, like, Jordan training Sanderson in his writing style. He also specifically says in this prologue that he is not writing it in Jordan's style. Whether or not I agree with Sanderson there is a different question.
He's not consciously intending to write it in style.
That's what he says.
Like, that wasn't the point.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that isn't, because I was fully bought into the other story then. I thought that was the story, and I never questioned it because it was such a common understanding of what had happened. I never thought to, like, dig into the details of it.
One of the things that's sort of bizarre is, up until the last couple of weeks of his death, apparently Jordan was not going to finish the series, and he wasn't going to let anyone else finish it. He had made several public announcements that said, if I die before the series is completed, my notes will be destroyed, and no one will finish The Wheel of Time. Which, again, is fascinating, because I've seen so many things of, like, Jordan didn't want the series to go unfinished, which, like, goes against several things that he said. Now, granted, he had a change of heart towards the end of his life, and he asked Harriet to find someone to complete the Wheel of Time. And Harriet, his wife, and several of his assistants, primarily Maria, and I believe the other one's name is Matt, the two of them took down notes from him, and he would dictate sections of the Wheel of Time. So of these last 3 books that were supposed to be one big book, but Sanderson divided it into 3, there's about 200 manuscript pages and scenes that were written exclusively by Jordan, and a ton of notes that Sanderson used to actually build out the project.
But ultimately, the timeline was he died in September, and Sanderson did not get the call until November of that year.
Interesting. Oh, that's so interesting. I should start reading the forewords to these books.
Yeah.
Oh, Jack.
I just want to start the story. I'm like, oh, I should read the foreword. I'll get back to it. I want to jump into the story. Listen, you two are the professionals on this podcast. I'm the layman. I'm the audience surrogate.
I know. I'm glad you brought it up though, so that we could clear it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is a super important clarification, because that's actually because that's such a big part of the story. People saying online is that that's what happened.
Yeah.
But okay.
So all that happens. He gets this call in November, he agrees, and then he spends the next, 5 months, I believe, because I don't get a detail more specific than spring of 2008. So anywhere between March and, let's say, May, June, they convene in Charleston, but Sanderson has spent those months rereading The Wheel of Time. He rereads it once and rereads it again, taking notes the whole time. They all gather in Charleston, and I'm going to be reading from Michael Livingston's Origins of the Wheel of Time, and this is a quotation from that. Quote, "In the spring of 2008, they all gathered in Charleston. As Brandon recalled, I asked for big sheets of butcher paper, and upon this I started writing down characters, plots, goals, and sequences as headings. Then we brainstormed ideas and answers to holes. I often presented my somewhat daring plans for sequences Robert Jordan had not outlined. I think a lot of these things I suggested were surprising to Team Jordan and made them worried. My argument was this, however. Robert Jordan would not have wanted to keep the last book stale. He wouldn't have done everything as expected. He wouldn't have flatlined the character arcs. He wouldn't have stopped the world building. If we played this book safe, we'd end up with a bland climax to the series. Harriet agreed and told me to proceed with some of these plans, with the warning that as editor, she would read them and see if I pulled off the sequences. If I did, they'd go in the books. If not, we'd remove them. This ended up working really well. It allowed me artistic exercise and freedom, driving the books in a direction I feel they needed to go without limitations. Granted, I had a personal rule. I didn't contradict Robert Jordan's previous books. If he had finished a scene in the notes, we were going to use it." Which, Taylor, you've mentioned several times of I can see him writing to this scene that no longer fits.
Interesting.
I think there were definitely a few times where I was reading this and I was like, oh, Robert Jordan definitely wrote this. Because...
Or at least outlined it, very specifically.
No, I feel like I could tell in some scenes where it was so... The voice was different. It was changed slightly in a way that I personally thought was worse. And so I was like, I'm pretty sure that Robert Jordan wrote this scene word for word.
And there are some scenes where it's I'm pretty sure that's 100% Jordan, and Sanderson just had to write this because it was a scene in the notes.
Yeah, that's also true.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's a lot of quotations pretty early on in this episode. Do we have one-sentence summaries?
I made a one-sentence summary.
I don't have a one-sentence summary.
Which I noticed Taylor's is about the reading. I tried to... My instinct was also to make a one-sentence summary that was about the reading experience, but I tried my best to pull back and no, I'm going to do a one sentence about the contents, about the story that happened.
Yeah, my one-sentence summary is just that I can't believe there's 2 more.
my one-sentence summary is, for a book very concerned about the approaching and very upcoming final battle, they sure waste a lot of time getting to it.
They do.
Yeah.
Stalling to give Graham more time to think of his one-sentence summary. Hearing that this was what Brandon Sanderson was originally supposed to do was just publish one more mega book, and I just found an article he posted back in... when did this article come out? I don't know, sometime in the past after he wrote Gathering Storm, but it's a retrospective on the writing process. He talks about how it was originally supposed to be one 2,000-page book, and he actually fought to make it into just being one book, like one 2,000-page book. But then the editor and the publisher basically hardlined, like, no, we're going to end up going for splitting up into multiple books. And the shocking thing to me is, like, if the original plan was to make these 3 books actually one kind of long book, but still shorter than all 3 books put together, man, there's a lot of wasted time in this book.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in this book that's just like wheel spinning until the final battle and doesn't matter. And yeah, this could have just been one final book.
Yeah, there's a whole thing in the biography as well. I should note that it's not exclusively a biography. It is the first like fifth of it is a biography, and then a lot of it is analysis of the Wheel of Time, because there is a lot here. Not all of it good, in terms of what the Wheel of Time is doing, but there's a lot that is worthy of analysis. And there's a lot of sort of interesting things in the realm of, like, you can see the White Tower, for example, comes from Robert Jordan went to the Citadel, the military college, and on the Citadel there is a massive, beautiful barracks that has a massive white tower in the center of it. So it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, obviously passing that every day had some sort of impact on Jordan.
Have you come up with your one-sentence summary?
Yes. My one-sentence summary is unfortunately a pun. Just like on the same realm as Jack, you could call this Wheel Spinning the book, and there's a pun there.
Wheel of spinning.
I guess it's a turning of the wheel in as how they describe it in the books, but yeah, we're all just gonna sigh dramatically through this. We recorded a bonus episode specifically so we would try to not be as harsh or as brutal to these books that I think we're going to be. But even still, we're starting this episode with so much grieving of just I can't believe we had to do this.
One thing I want to do, and this can be after we actually read the summary, but one thing I wanted to do right at the start, just to like, I feel like it would get our attitudes a little right, get us a little more prepped to go into this, and make this whole episode not too much of a downer, is just start with a couple things you liked about the book. Even if you have to dig, just start with a couple things you liked about the book so we can ease our way into the probably much larger list of things we don't like about the book.
Well, I hope this isn't just like a big, long...
Yeah, because there's some cool stuff. There's some definitely cool stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I want to get into like genuine criticism. Though.
Yeah.
Not criticism, not in like the...
I don't just want to dunk
like
on this.
Debbie Downer.
Yeah.
Like criticism as in like I read this.
That was the bonus.
And I want to talk about it.
The bonus episode was the dunking on it. This is the
right.
Yeah.
So Graham, is your summary make sense to go first? I imagine so.
No.
Really?
My summary is too long. It got up to 3,000 words, and it covers the entire series.
Oh yeah. Graham was trying to summarize the whole of like the broad strokes of the whole of Wheel of Time leading up to this book.
Yes. I think I'm going to
just fill in the gaps when we get there.
Yeah, I can fill in the gaps as we get there.
Because I don't think a lot of it is that important.
I mean, the very short, like, basic premise of this book, which, you know, to anyone who's never heard of Wheel of Time, is...
Actually, I do have something that might do that.
Oh?
Here,
I'm just thinking, like, a back-of-the-book summary of, like, what this series is about.
Here, I'll just give, like, the character introductions through the Eye of the World, and that will cover most of what you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Wheel of Time is a fantasy series that takes place on far future Earth, and is also in Earth's distant past. The story begins with a dramatic prologue where Luz Theron, the dragon, has successfully imprisoned the Dark One. However, imprisoning the Dark One has tainted Sidene, the male half of magic. Using it now will bring in a violent, destructive insanity, quote-unquote, onto the world. Luz Theron is confronted by Ishamael, the chief servant of the Dark One, who heals Luz Theron of his insanity. Luz Theron, seeing the insanity has caused him to murder his loved ones, and caused him to destroy the world in an event called the Breaking, making the map we recognize today and creating the legendary mountain Dragon Mount, a key plot location in the text. We flash forward 3,000 years into the future, where Moraine, Gandalf is her analog, and her companion Lanel Morgan arrive at the idyllic Emmons Field, a place in a valley in the two rivers. A gleeman and bard, Tom Marilyn, has arrived for the coming Harvest Festival when suddenly Trollocs, kind of monstrous hybrid animals, attack before the Harvest Festival, trying to kill or capture three of our main characters, Rand, Perrin, and Matt. Moraine, a kind of female wizard called an Aes Sedai, tells the boys that they are Ta'veren, fate-touched individuals, and one of them may be the Dragon Reborn. They flee Emmons Field, joined by Nynaeve, the village healer/leader of the Women's Circle and potential Aes Sedai, and Egwene, Rand's childhood love interest, and another potential Aes Sedai. They travel to the ancient and abandoned city of Shadar Logoth to hide from the pursuers, and Matt picks up a cursed dagger that functions both as this book's One Ring and this book's cursed Morgul blade. They escape, dividing the party between Rand, Matt, and Tom, and everyone else. In this escape, Tom is lost to the party and thought to have died. Also, now Lan and Nynaeve are in love. This is explained with no build-up. They have no chemistry. I'm so mad about it. This is how 95% of romance works in the Wheel of Time. Egwene and Perrin are also separated from the main group and are guided to Camelin as Elias, who is a wolf brother, a kind of man who can control and communicate with wolves. Perrin kills a member of the Children of the Light, which is a militaristic organization that functions as witch hunters for anyone who can do magic. The party reconvene in Camelin, Camelot, where they meet Min, a woman who can see the future, Loyal, a scholarly Ogier, which is like an elf, a treant, and a giant, were one creature, and due to a series of mishaps, Rand also meets Elaine, daughter of the Queen and future Aes Sedai, her brothers Galad and Gawain, as well as the Queen Morgase, the Queen of Andor, which doesn't really matter because about 5% of the politics in this book actually have a payoff. She has an Aes Sedai advisor who is super evil-coded named Elida, and one of the Red Aja who hunt down and still male magic users. There have been an outbreak of false dragons reborns, and one has been captured and stilled. Elida warns the Queen about Rand, but nothing really comes of it. Loyal joins our fellowship, and they travel to the Eye of the World, which is located in the Blight, Mordor. The Eye of the World is a source of Saidin that is untainted, guarded by the Green Man, who's sort of a Tom Bombadil figure. They discover the Horn of Valir and the Banner of the Dragon, two artifacts of Luz Theron that hold mythic status even today. These also might be a seal imprisoning the Dark One that they destroy in taking the artifacts, but honestly, I'm not sure. Two of the Forsaken showed up, who are servants of the Dark One, but they are dispatched. Rand uses Saidin for the first time to destroy Beelzemon, who is really Ishamael in disguise, but he comes back literally in the prologue of the next book, so it's not that big a deal. The book ends with Rand unaware that he is the Dragon Reborn, but Moraine tells Lan about him.
Honestly, I see why your summary's 3,000 words. I would have literally just gone, yeah, this story's about a reborn Chosen One hero trying to fight the Dark One in a constant cycle of history, and there's a lot of... And I would have just done that. Like, there we go.
Yes, but also...
Like, that was so much detail if you were trying to summarize the whole Wheel of Time up to this point.
It is
that
so
detail
much
that does
detail,
not
but
matter.
also... No, it does matter, Jack, because all of these characters are still present, and I, like... On some level, I feel like the audience should know, and you guys should know, of, like, how they first get here into the book. But yes, like, that is sort of what we're doing, of, like, this cycle of rebirth is the main thing.
But I mean, the important thing going into the summary for Gathering Storm is that the series is about Rand fighting / preparing to fight in the final battle against the Dark Lord, and this is the most recent turning of the Wheel of Time, which is just this repeating cycle of fate where like the same people are reborn. Well, the same like archetypes of people are reborn, going through the same general events in the same constant repeating history of fighting the Dark Lord over and over again. This is the most recent turning of it. We'll get into the summary, but like it feels like this whole book is building up towards this book, and the series, the next 3 books are building up towards like the final battle.
Yes, the last battle, as it's called, which is weird because it's called the last battle, despite the fact that textually it can never be the last battle, because there will always be
It's the last battle of this turning of the wheel.
Yes, of this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The Wheel of Time, the thing that was shocking to me is how bleak this series is, in terms of, like, its outlook on the world, of, like, textually, a better world is not possible. There will always be this horrific cycle of violence that everyone is trapped in and can never escape. And this is just, like, something you just gotta deal with.
Hey, but at least you get a second chance.
At least you get a second chance.
I was gonna talk about that, but we should probably jump into the summary of this.
Yes, 30
book.
minutes or 20 minutes into our recording. Let's start the summary.
It's gonna be a weird episode. Anyway,
it is.
The Gathering Storm is book 12 in the Wheel of Time, and the first book not written by the original author, Robert Jordan, but taken on by Brandon Sanderson after Robert Jordan's death. We talked about this. The book has a lot of different perspectives that often do not overlap. However, the two main storylines follow Rand and Egwene. Rand is the Dragon Reborn, as we just talked about. This means that Rand is the ultimate agent of light, who is prophesized to kill the Dark One, the antagonist of the series. Part of the prophecy is that Rand is going to go crazy. Rand spends the first half of this book unifying his allies and questioning whether he is going crazy. During this time, he kicks out his top advisor and decides that his ties of love and family are what make him weak. So he becomes a ruthless and unloving leader. In a past book, Rand has captured someone from the Dark One's inner circle, or trusted, named Cimaraj. Cimaraj is released from capture by a Dark Friend's spy, posing as a good sorcerer or a good Aes Sedai, and immediately goes to kill Rand. In the skirmish, Rand gets captured, but in being almost forced to kill his wife Min, unlocks a new power that allowed him to break out of capture and teaches him that balefire is the only way to remove these evil people from the weave, or the pattern of the turning of the wheel forever. Rand goes on many diplomatic missions. He meets the Daughter of the Nine Moons, an empress, who he is not able to negotiate with, meaning that her armies will be attacking from the flank when Rand goes to the last battle. Rand also went to the Borderlanders to ask for an alliance, but they would only ally with him if he stepped into their anti-magic bubble, which he was unwilling to do. As for his mental state, in his own head, Rand is adamant that he is not going crazy. However, a dead man, Lews Therin, as we just talked about, is in his brain and they can speak to each other, meaning that many watch Rand mutter to himself. Over the course of the book, Rand tries to cut away anything that makes him human: love, empathy, caring, to make himself the perfect conduit of the prophecy, to do what needs to be done. In the end, Rand screams at the sky at the top of a mountain and realizes that it all is for love, and banishes Lews Therin from his mind. Shifting focus, Egwene. Egwene begins this book having been stripped of her rank in the White Tower. Magic users in this book are called Aes Sedai, and they are all women. The White Tower is the coalition of the Aes Sedai. In the beginning, the White Tower is crumbling politically on the inside. Rebel Aes Sedai have left the tower in protest of the person occupying the Amyrlin seat, or the top leader of the White Tower, Elaida. In a past book, Egwene was promoted to the Amyrlin seat of these rebels. Now back within the White Tower itself, Egwene fights against everything that Elaida has been doing to sow division between the different sects of magics called the Ajas. She endures beating and imprisonment, or Egwene endures beating and imprisonment for her rebellion, but when absolute disaster strikes and raiders come for the White Tower, Egwene defends her home valiantly, and the old Amyrlin seat, Elaida, is taken by these raiders. Egwene shows up the next day with an army, but doesn't need to use it, as the Sisters of the White Tower have actually already decided to accept her as their Amyrlin seat. She takes the throne and unites the tower once again, just in time to aid Rand in the coming last battle. There are lots of different perspectives in this book, but Egwene and Rand are kind of our two main characters of this book.
As is appropriate, we skipped everything that happened with Perrin in the summary.
We skipped Perrin, we skipped Matt, we skipped a lot of different...
Which is a shame, because Matt has a couple great chapters.
He has a couple great chapters, they just don't
matter.
They have nothing to do with what's going on. It's like the town where everyone turns into a murderer at night and like then forgets it the next morning. Like,
to me, that seems like something purely Sanderson. I don't think that Robert Jordan had anything to do with that. I think Sanderson had that idea and thought it was cool and got away with it.
Yeah, I think that is a definitely a Sanderson scene. You can see one of the really easy ways to tell the difference between who's writing is, like many of his books, Sanderson will pick up on things like tics. I'm trying to think of one for Mistborn for a character, but
I think with Sazed.
Not necessarily like that, but that would be an example of like terrorist speech. I mean more like how like swearing it has its own like lingo for the world and stuff like that. But like for example, Matt all the time says blood and bloody ashes. Whenever you see that like repeated more than once during a scene, that really seems like, oh, that's Sanderson writing, because he likes that sort of vocal tick, and that emerges a lot in that particular chapter.
One thing I fully didn't process properly until listening to your summary, Taylor, was that the whole White Tower plot didn't actually even really get resolved by Egwene like reuniting the Ajas. It got resolved by what, from like the White Tower story perspective, was a Deus Ex Machina of the evil leader just being kidnapped, and now the problem's gone.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole book is Egwene is thinking to herself like, I have to resist through nonviolence. Egwene very much believes that the Master's tools can dismantle the Master's house. Of like, to paraphrase Audre Lorde, like she totally believes that she can work from within the system to destroy it. But like she makes absolutely no progress, and like the Shanchan attack and the Shanchan Empire, who don't matter really, but they show up and they attack, and like that's resolved. And also Egwene does have an army that like show up willing to help her. So this entire book she could have actually left, and you could have cut out hundreds of pages if she just came back with an army.
So let's actually on that note, let's do the palate cleanser I mentioned of just like a couple things that you genuinely liked about the book. I can go first. Which up until the ending, which we just talked about, I did enjoy the White Tower plot. I thought it was interesting, even if I disagreed with her methods, and I think she was naive in the way she did it. I did think that plot was interesting, watching Egwene navigate the White Tower and dealing with these essentially political divisions within the White Tower and fight against this, or like try to resist this like insane authority figure that's driving everyone apart. I thought that storyline was interesting. A couple other things I liked. Weirdly, in any other story, I would like the pattern as a narrative device, in the sense that I think it is a fascinating curse upon the world that I would love a story that was more focused on fighting it, like more a story about fighting the pattern in the Wheel of Time, which this book doesn't really do. But every once in a while, it kind of touches on how insane the pattern is. And those are the parts I really like.
For the record, we are all on Team Dark One. We agree with it. We should think the pattern should be destroyed.
The Dark One is trying to break the pattern, but like,
I'm not sure it is, but we'll get into that at the end of A Memory of Light.
But I liked, like, for example, there was a moment where Rand, right near like the climax of Rand's story, where he is wielding this immense power and he considers trying to break the pattern because he has this realization of how horrible it is. The thing I didn't like is then the kind of turn back. It's like framing the pattern as a good thing because it gives the good guys second chances against the bad guys, which, not a big fan of. But hypothetically, as a narrative device, I do like the pattern. I think it has a lot of potential to have interesting stories. I don't think it quite hit the mark here, but so there's a couple things I liked about the book.
Okay. Taylor?
Yeah, I also really liked Egwene's story. I think she was by far my favorite perspective. I mean, maybe there could have been cutting, but I think that the struggle was an important part of it. I think the struggling was different enough each chapter that it worked for me. Because she was doing different punishments every time, and it wasn't necessarily super repetitive. So I actually really liked Egwene's chapters, and seeing her name pop up always gave me a little bit of excitement. And I always slowed down the audiobook so I could really savor in everything that she had to say. I loved Siuan and Gareth Bryn. They fall in love in this book and get married, or like they become warders and get married. I think they're super cute, and I loved listening to them. I think Gareth Bryn, every time he was on the thing, every time he was on the page, I just wrote, "Lover boy, lover boy's here." He was like the perfect lover boy. He just like wanted to love on Siuan the whole time and did everything for her.
The one romance that made sense.
Gawain, who was Egwene's lover boy. I thought he was lover boy in the beginning, and then at the end I was sad that he was just trying to like control her in the end, which is sad. Because he had such lover boy potential.
Gawain is a dude who sucks. Gawain is the person who installs Elida as Emerlin's seat.
How?
Like, he helps the rebels install Elida as Emerlin's seat. So, like, I don't know why. Like, he has motivations in whichever book that happens. I think it's, like, book 5. Like, Elida...
Book 5?
Elida is, like, Emerlin's seat
Book
for, like,
5?
7 books.
How?
Yeah. That's the thing of like, this is why the Egwene chapters were frustrating for me, is like, we have been dealing with 7 books of politicking at the White Tower, and it's ultimately resolved by Egwene showing up with an army and saying, actually, I should be Emerlin's seat. And like, the Tower already wanted this. And it's like, you could have cut
I really, truly...
You could have cut so much. That's the one sentence.
I truly got the sense that Elida had maybe been on Merlin's seat for a book.
Well, to be
Me
more
too.
fair
I
to
thought
the
this
books,
was like a thing that happened last book. That's the impression I got.
Who is Emerlin's seat has gone back and forth multiple times between Elida and Egwene. Initially, the reason Egwene becomes Emerlin's seat, becomes like the leader of the Aes Sedai, is because some dark friends, and I think one of the Forsaken, again, it's been a while, install her as the Emerlin seat, thinking, oh, this is a child, she'll be a great puppet. And then Egwene is actually an extremely effective Aes Sedai and Emerlin seat, and is really good at the politicking of the Tower, and is also one of the most powerful Aes Sedai who's ever lived. Like, one of the things that's constantly mentioned about Egwene and Nynaeve is they're some of the strongest channelers since the Age of Legend. So, yeah, I could consult my summary and see when she first becomes Emerlin's seat.
Yeah. But Graham, what are things in the book you genuinely enjoyed?
It's not in this book, but I really like that the Wheel of Time takes place in the far future of Earth, and it's not set on a different world.
I learned that earlier today when you mentioned it in your summary. I did not know that.
Yes, the Wheel of Time does not take place in a parallel world. It takes place on Earth. This is never mentioned textually. There are a lot of like minor details. Like, for example, in the first book, there's a mention of 2 characters talking about 2 giants, Mosk and Merk, fighting with lances of fire that could go all across the Earth. Moscow and America fighting with ICBMs. Like, the Cold War has been turned into this weird myth of giants fighting with lances. There's a lot of stuff that has, like, aged well. Like, there's a great sage who's supposed to be Anne Landers, who was a gossip columnist and advice writer for many newspapers. And she's supposed to be a great sage. And, of course, Anne Landers does not have a lot of place in cultural consciousness anymore. But there's a lot of stuff like that. Let's see. What do I like about this book in particular? I do genuinely really like the chapter with Matt in this book, where he and Tom go to this city or this town, and like people keep dying and getting reborn at the beginning of the day. And it's like a great little microcosm of the wheel and this cycle of violence and just a way that the world is breaking. There's a great line from Stephen King's The Gunslinger, and it's like the world has moved on, and like just there's a sense of wrongness about the world. And I really feel that with that chapter. I wish there was more of that kind of thing, even though it doesn't tie in with the main plot. That's a vignette where I'm like, oh, this is really effective and adds a lot to the mood and the feel of the world. Anytime there is a scene where something happens, like the Wheel of Time does like inexplicably get good. Oftentimes most of it is like the interiority of characters thinking about their situation, and like we know their situation, that's not that interesting, all things considered. But the whenever there's like action or characters make a choice or a weird turning of the wheel or the Dark One intervenes, like probably the coolest scene in this whole book is when the Dark One shows up and frees the Forsaken. What's her name?
Semirog.
Yeah. When he shows up with and speaks through his servant and frees Semirog. That scene's awesome. Now, granted, the scene right before it is bad, but
that tune into the bonus episode to hear us talk about that scene.
I mean,
Oh, and also the entire scene where the Forsaken are having in the prologue where the Forsaken are having their meeting. That was cool. That was interesting. That was making me excited for what might happen in the book. But like the Forsaken, which are like the evil people that keep being reborn into the pattern that are like on the Dark One side.
They do not keep being reborn. They have never died.
Oh, okay. They just live through it all.
They live through it all. Or at least they have not died since
Luz Theron.
Luz Theron, yes, is correct. Essentially, the Dark One is all the Forsaken's thesis advisors, because he shows up. The Forsaken, textually, we get in this book, and like, thank God Sanderson is willing to do world building or just reconfirm things for the world in a very transparent way. Because Rand has a thought, and it's probably Luz Theron who has this thought, actually, that Forsaken did research into the One Power and discovered the Dark One as another source of power. And because of that, they all decided to serve him, because being able to directly conduit into Satan, basically, gives you a much more powerful magic than just what is available naturally in the world. So, like, they're all like researchers at heart. They're all scientists, and they become these monsters because they have to serve the Dark One for this awesome power. That is kind of neat. I think that's fun. Like, if the Wheel of Time was just about the Forsaken, I think it would bang.
I liked how Rand became such a cool, kind of perfect, I guess, foil for the Dark One. Like, he was true. I truly felt like some points in the book, the only person who could ever truly understand him is the Dark One, which I think is so cool. Like, Rand stood so far, by thinking about his adversary so deeply, he then kind of stood above others, and that was literally the only person of equal who could ever understand him.
Yeah.
Oh, also, one of the interesting scenes in the book early on is when Ishamael, or maybe it's Beelzemon, or maybe it's just the Dark One. It's hard to tell, because again, like, people keep getting reborn. But when Rand and the Dark One have a conversation, like, sort of early on in this book, that's one of the coolest scenes in the book.
In a dream, yeah.
He just has a dream. And it's unclear, like Rand thinks it was the Dark One pulling him into a dream to talk to him. But then, based on what the Dark One said, the Dark One thought Rand initiated this communication. Yeah. So it's actually like a little bit of a, like, did this just happen? Did the pattern, did the magic just pull us together for this shockingly quiet, vulnerable moment of just talking with your greatest enemy?
Yeah.
Like, not your greatest enemy that, like, literally fate itself is pitting you against over and over and over again.
And, like, there are moments where that really, really works for me in terms of, like, the pattern reemerging over and over again. There's a scene in one of the early books where, like, Rand starts having nightmares, and the Dark One keeps showing ages past where the Dark One won. Whether or not the Dark One can actually win is an interesting question that we'll probably answer in A Memory Called Light, but there are outcomes where, like, the dragon is corrupted and destroys the world, and the Dark One keeps showing those outcomes. Because according to, like, the cosmology of the Wheel of Time, this has happened infinite times. The Dark One keeps showing Rand these visions of him failing that have actually happened, and keeps going, I have won again, Luz Theron. And it's this really effective scene, and it's just one of those things where, again, it's like, why isn't the pattern the villain? Because that's such a great villainous scene, but again, the pattern...
Yeah, like, what's so special about this pattern?
There isn't anything special about this turning of the wheel. I mean, like, of course...
That's the thing. That's the thing. There isn't anything. Well, maybe the book will end with it becoming special, but...
Well, I mean, I don't want to spoil A Memory Called Light, but, like, as far as I know, this turning of the wheel is not special. It's just one that we focus on.
Which is interesting, because, you know, when you, as a storyteller, like, usually you set out to show something of importance, a difference in some way.
Yeah. And just at my notes here, on the subject of this specific reoccurring, there's a lot of ground here that I think is not used very well. Specifically, one with the character of Tom Marilyn, and I'll get to my point with this in just a second of why I think he's underutilized. But Wheel of Time is constantly pulling one of my least favorite tropes, which is we get a flashback, or in the case of Wheel of Time, a historical or mythical event reoccurring as part of the pattern. But oftentimes we are only informed that this is an important portent after it's already happened. So, for example, like in the second or third book, Matt, who is Taviran, he's supposedly an important figure of the past come again, or at least like a fate-touched person, has very little combat experience at this point of the book. He duels both Gawain and Galad at the same time, both of which are like the most gifted swordsmen ever. They're like super soldiers. They've been receiving castle-trained man-at-arms training for years, and they're training to become warders, which for anyone who has not read The Wheel of Time, being a warder is like being a super bodyguard for an Aes Sedai. So he fights these two men, fully armored and armed with swords, and he defeats them with nothing more than a quarterstaff, and like dispatches them easily and relatively quickly. And then we learn after the fight that a mythological and historical swordsman who has only lost a single fight in his life is said to have lost a fight with a farmer armed with a quarterstaff, implying that these young men are these mythological figures come again in a new age of the world. So instead of like setting this up with someone telling us this story and like us realizing, oh, that's like that story we heard, the wheel is turning once again, we get told in hindsight why this scene is cool. Because mostly it's just frustrating because it's like Matt has picked up a weapon like 3 times and has not been very good.
Lazy storytelling. It seems like a super easy way to be like, oh, actually, guys, in hindsight, that was cool. Remember that? That was actually that was my plan the whole time, guys. Don't worry about it. That was my plan the whole time.
Yeah. And like this happens relatively frequently where you see something and then in hindsight it's explained to you why that was interesting. And sometimes it's within the same scene. Because like I cannot overstate of like that fight happens with Matt and then you turn the page and someone is like, that's why that's interesting. These two guys talk about it. And I really feel that like Tom Marilyn is so underutilized in this because he's introduced in the story as a gleeman, a bard, a storyteller. And he's in the Fellowship, the equivalent of the Fellowship of the Ring. He is there and he does tell stories. And if I was Robert Jordan, I would kiss myself for creating that character. That's a brilliant move of, oh, thank God, you have a character who can give your exposition, but do it in an interesting way. But he's never utilized in that way. I don't think Tom Marilyn ever tells a story that has to do with the pattern in Luz Theron. This makes The Wheel of Time really frustrating to read, but I think it probably makes it a really fascinating series to reread, because you now know the story, and you can see places where it's being set up, and like the pattern reoccurring, but...
It's like the horse and the cart, or like the chicken and the egg.
Yeah. Absolutely. Or a circular wheel for that matter.
But yeah, something I know we wanted to talk a little bit about like craft.
Oh yeah.
I know we have a lot of stuff to talk about. I had one main point of craft, which is something I knew going into this book. And I spent some time before we started recording, trying to find where Brandon Sanderson said this. And hopefully I'll find it later and then I can, maybe we can put a link to it in the description or find somewhere else to put it. So Brandon Sanderson obviously is writing his own Wheel of Time, his own like magnum opus, massive epic fantasy series with tons of character, magic, lore, world building, etc. Stormlight Archive, which we're reading book 1 for the next episode. Book 5's coming out soon, but currently book 4 is the most recent one. And when book 4 came out, there was a lot of people that seemed confused or annoyed when there were a lot of characters that just didn't really show up. Characters that were very, very critical, very, very important to book 3. In book 4, we check in on them every once in a while, and even that's kind of rare. Like, they're just really not present in the book. And a lot of people were like, where are these characters? They were my favorite characters. They were really important. Why are they suddenly not here? And what I remember from this quote by Sanderson, I can't remember if it was like an interview or words of Brandon, but he said essentially that one of the lessons he learned writing Wheel of Time was that Wheel of Time had this problem where it introduced this massive cast of characters and then felt the need to they were part of the story now. You can't like forget them. You have to have chapters. You have to be giving them the necessary screen time. And that's what leads to, like in Gathering Storm, the vast number, I say vast, there's like only 3 chapters. The 3 parent chapters where just nothing happens at all, period. Like nothing happens. Because in writing this, it's like, oh no, Perrin's an important character. We have to keep checking up on him. We have to keep inventing reasons for him to be important. And also, that's sort of what that Matt I know we said we liked the Matt chapter, but that chapter to me felt like one of these Brandon has to include Matt in the story because he feels like he needs to include one of the main characters. And so that was him like doing his best to make the inclusion exciting and interesting. So what he did in his own book, the lesson he learned was, hey, if for the period of time that this book is taking place, these characters just don't have an interesting thing to do in the story, sideline them. Like, it just didn't matter. It didn't matter to the important story that was happening in that book.
And that's one of the interesting things of, like, Sanderson is willing to cut out, like, an action scene like that. Because I'm sure, like, if he got down on the dirt and, like, wrote, like, Dalinar fighting the action scene, he would have no problem making it interesting and, like, exciting to read. But it would be unnecessary to the story.
It would be one battle of a long military campaign that, like, we only really care about, like the final battle of. Like, we don't...
Yeah. So you get all of that, and, like, I don't want to be too harsh to, like, the idea of just, like, creating chapters that just set mood. Because, again, that Matt chapter sets the mood. I think it is useful in this text. But the fact that this is something he learns from the Wheel of Time, I think is very true. Because, like, Jordan always wants to give you more. And, like, there are many fans who say if Robert Jordan was alive today, the Wheel of Time wouldn't be finished because we would be on book, like, 25. Of the Wheel of Time. Granted, I think that's an exaggeration. He has the series pretty much back on track by Knife of Dreams, which is the 10th book, or maybe the 11th. They blend together for me. He has the series back on track pretty much by that point. But I also don't think it's wrapped up in 3 books, because Jordan is so particular about, like, you get every single character's traveling. They can't just show up at a location, and we just fill in the gap or something like that. It's like, here's 3 chapters explaining how they got from place to place, and stuff like that. There's no room to cut. And, like, in some ways I admire this dedication to this level of detail, but also at the same time, it's a very frustrating thing to read, at least for me. The other thing that gets me constantly is how much of these books hinge on characters not communicating. And, like, this is such a reoccurring plot that it is, like, you have to understand it as a theme to these texts. But also, that's a frustrating thing to read.
I think something that I admired by Sanderson's, I was surprised reading this book, was his use of metaphor. I think Sanderson's other books are, we talked about how he has this very straightforward prose, this kind of, his style is not one for, I guess, flowery language, you could call it.
It's very utilitarian.
Absolutely. And I hope that a lesson he picks up from Wheel of Time is to use a lot more metaphor in his coming books, because I really enjoyed the prose and how this was written. I thought that, especially, I think Suwan, she was always using, like, fishing metaphors, which I thought was very interesting, or just, like, things you wouldn't even think of, like, just, like, the way that it was written, like, there was metaphor almost on every page, like, he did something like this, or he did something like that, and I loved that. I really appreciated that.
It was nice to see him experiment with a different style, because even if he's not one-to-one recreating Jordan's style, he is working within a different style than he normally does. It's also fun that you mentioned Sawan fishing, because apparently both her and Moraine are excellent fly fishermen. I guess it was fly fisher women.
Yeah, I mean, it was, like, almost comical.
Yeah.
Hers is easy to say because I think she was, like, so... Every single thing she said was fisherman related, which I think was silly. You know, she stuck to it. But...
I'm now wondering if anyone has given the actress for Siwon in the show a "women want me, fish fear me" hat. If not, I will put that out into the world. I will make a shitty MS Paint version of that.
Oh, please. Yeah, I know there was more craft stuff we wanted to talk about. Like, Taylor, I know you had about Brandon having to stick to the outline and having to stick to certain scenes.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about that in the bonus episode, so maybe it makes more sense if I just repeat it here. But as a writer who has thought that my story was going to go in one direction, had an outline for a story to go in one direction, sometimes you get there and you sit in the character's head and you look around and you start to realize that with this character's backstory, with this character's demeanor and the way that they've reacted to things in the past, how you thought the character was going to react in that moment is so different than how when you're sitting in the character's head, when you're having this character react to things that are happening around them that you planned, suddenly you start to realize that actually their reaction would be different than the reaction that you thought that they would have. And I think Sanderson also realized that, especially in scenes with Rand, and the way that his arc was handled in this book, he had to force, it was very forced, in my opinion, that the way that he reacted and the way that him and Min, his wife, reacted to these situations. Because Min is very devoted to Rand. And the fact that she knew that he was... Okay, so what happens is that, like I said this in the summary, but basically a Forsaken, an evil one, comes, collars Rand, and forces Rand to put his hand around Min's neck and almost strangle her to death. And in seeing himself strangling his wife to death, that's kind of when he has this breakthrough and he breaks free and basically is like, realizes that...
Unlocks the true power.
Yeah, he has the true power now and he's not collared anymore and he can kill Cimarag, or however you say your name.
It's worth noting that there is no official pronunciation guide for The Wheel of Time. The closest thing you'll get is the audiobook, but Jordan will also often disagree with the audiobook. And for some things, he will refuse to give a canonical pronunciation for. So,
which is wild, because there are so many strange names that have wild, spellings.
For the record, no one has done this with Siwan, but there is one of Moraine in a Women Want Me, Fish Fear Me shirt.
Oh, perfect.
For fan art. I will put this in the episode description.
Yeah.
But
sorry, Taylor. Continue making your point.
To me, the most blatant, or when this first really came to me very strongly, was in that moment where Rand seems extremely forced to freak out about this. His demeanor doesn't make sense to the way that he reacts to this, with all of the setup that's happened before that hand that we know about Rand's temperament and the way that he reacts to things and how he's kind of stoic. It's kind of strange that he's extremely forced to be like, stop, like she hates me so bad and I have to stop looking at her or loving her, because loving her is a weakness. And it's also extremely forced and strange that Min reacts to this. I can't trust him anymore. It just doesn't make any sense. But I can see, if I were writing an outline, I could see how I could put this as a breaking point between their relationship, when in reality, because Rand's agency was taken away from him, there's this level of, there's no nuance in their relationship, and it becomes extremely black and white, and his lack of agency actually doesn't make any difference in the way that they emotionally react to this, and so it comes off really forced and really flat. And I know why this happens, because as you go on, this has to be their relationship in order for Min's story to keep going in the way that it needs to. Because she wouldn't have gone to General who starts with a C.
There are 2,700 named characters in this series. We're not going to remember them all.
Cadswain. She goes to Cadswain, who is...
Thank you.
Well, she's an Aes Sedai. She's one of the
Well, Cadswain gets basically demoted by Brand in this book and is kind of a rebel to Rand, but also still working for him, because she doesn't accept what Rand has basically dismissed her. And so Min wouldn't have gone to Cadswain if this emotional reaction didn't happen. That's just, to me, it really seems like Sanderson was writing this scene and he was looking around and he was like, okay, well, this doesn't really make any fucking sense, but let's keep going. Because, Robert Jordan was dead. He can't rewrite this part. Yeah.
You can't talk to him. The other thing, on this sort of theme of agency, with the very end of the book, do you think Rand is banishing Luz Theron and is becoming an agent in the story once again? Or do you think he's accepting that he is Luz Theron and he is no longer an agent in his own story and he's okay with that?
I think that my kind of reading of this is that this entire time he thought Lews Therin was different to himself and hated Lews Therin. He was this bumbling, miserable man who's just crying in his head all the time. And, standing at the top of the world, screaming at the sky, he realizes that maybe that's just his internal monologue and how he feels about himself. And for the first time, he's willing to show love to Lews Therin, because the top of the world, he's thinking about love very deeply and how we can continue, the second chance is the second chance at love. And so I think he finally looks at Lews Therin and is like, I love you, even though this is not in the text, but he feels love towards Lews Therin, and in loving Lews Therin and accepting him for who he is, banishes him and taking him into himself.
I very much read the story. I agree with all that. That's an amazing reading. I very much read the story as beginning with Rand having accepted his place in prophecy. And I mean, his whole thing is he wants to be harder and hard in his heart so that he can be, I think Taylor, you put it perfectly during your summary, but so he can become a perfect vessel for prophecy. So, and I think the banishing of Cadsuane is just it is a continuation of that path. Is a realization that I need to be an agent of prophecy, and these other people are trying to be agents over me, but I need to be but prophecy needs to be the driving force. So I need to get rid of these other people that are using me for their own purposes because prophecy needs to use me. And the end of the book is him essentially taking at least some part of agency back, in the sense that he's I still need to love. I still want to love. That's the point. That's the agency I'm going to maintain. It's a very because the whole book, he's very fatalist. He's very I just need to get, he repeats it over and over and over again. I just need to get to the last battle and I can die. I just need to get that far. Because part of the prophecy is that he dies at the last battle. At least that's what I took. I don't think they actually say the prophecy outright, but I'm pretty sure that's...
No, that's another one where we get a lot of characters describing the prophecies of the dragon, but I don't know if we ever get a scene where someone just blatantly gives us, this is the prophecy of the dragon.
It might not even be a written down prophecy so much as just a general understanding of the events that keep repeating themselves.
I mean, it's genuinely hard to say. Again, there's the events that keep repeating themselves, but also these books are filled with so many wild shit. Mikhail Gorbachev is one of the heroes of old. I won't get over that. I'm going to keep saying that because it's a wild thing to put in your book. I mean, not that I think it's necessarily a bad thing to put in your book, but it's interesting to do something like that. For the record, when Matt blows the Horn of Valir in book 2, and the Horn of Valir calls all the heroes of old, there's a bunch of different heroes. There's King Arthur shows up, and Shiva, god of destruction, shows up. And Mikhail Gorbachev is also there. He's not called Mikhail Gorbachev, but people have asked and have confirmed that Mikkel the Peacemaker is supposed to be Mikhail Gorbachev.
Nice.
Again, what's sort of interesting there is it's the closest we get to the Wheel of Time interacting with real-world myth. And that's not to say that there isn't a ton of real-world myth in here. King Arthur is very present here. If you consider Lord of the Rings myth, it's absolutely in conversation with Lord of the Rings. And I almost wish that was more textual, because I think that would be more interesting to me if he was doing something in the lines of a Zelazny, a Harlan Ellison, a Gaiman, where they are taking these actual mythological characters and putting them in the story as the mythological character. Obviously, Greendel is supposed to be in conversation with Grundel from Beowulf. Stuff like that, where it's you're borrowing names and you're borrowing ideas. There's a scene where Matt gets hung on the world tree for several days and is reborn. And it's well, that's Odin. He doesn't lose an eye, but that's what happens to Odin. And it's all these sorts of things where you... the book is gesturing at these other myths, but it doesn't bring them in as textually as I would think they're interesting. I just kind of wish there was more of that, and also... I think the thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there's no way to sort of get ahead of the books because it will explain to you something in hindsight. And if it shows a path of if you're familiar with these myths, you might know some of where the book is going. and like able to retell what the pattern is because you are familiar with real world myth. That's one avenue to go. And then the other avenue is like, I'm going to tell you my own unique mythology within this world through our characters, and you get to watch that repeat. That's another avenue. And the book never really does either. Like, there's a lot of King Arthur's court in these books, but it's a lot of the aesthetics of King Arthur's court. Like, Rand has Excalibur, or Calendor, as it's called in this, and he pulls it from a stone. But apart from that, there's not a lot of overlap. Also, just for the record, I know it doesn't matter for this book because it's its own thing. Excalibur is not the sword in the stone. Like, I just want to be clear here. He gets the Excalibur from the Lady of the Lake later. The two different swords.
No, yeah, I can't remember the name of the other sword, but I do know that the sword in the stone.
It has different names. It's often just referred to as the sword in the stone, but it is also commonly called Clarent.
Clarent. That's the name I'm familiar with.
Horrible name for a sword. Call it Excalibur.
Clarence.
This is
my legendary. This is my sword of legends, Clarence.
Yeah, exactly. What?
That shall slay the.
My sword of legend, Stephen. Like what?
I could just say the one thing I was going to say about the ending, which is I think that I agree with you, Taylor, that he is accepting Luz Theron into himself. But I think part of, at least in my reading, he's accepting on some level that like, I don't have any choice in this, so I might as well learn to love it. And if I am this person and he is also me, I have to accept this in order for me to stay sane. And I hope Rand has like a little bit of fun characterization to him in the next books. Like one of the things that's made me really sad throughout these books is like Rand is a pretty talented musician and he just stops playing music. And I think that's mainly because like, you know, he's becoming this different figure, this vessel of prophecy, but it's never really dwelled on. Rand just sort of stops playing music. And if there's a scene at some point in this book where like Rand picks up the flute again, I might cry, even though I don't like him. Like I don't think his characterization is anything interesting, but just because of that kind of maneuver, it would work for me. But yeah, let's take a break.
Don't you have to roll us in with a we're back?
We're back. To the
okay.
Audience.
No. I always cut around with a you're back, so we may not actually be back yet.
I'm just thinking, I mean, most of my comments going on, I know that there's a lot interesting that we almost talked about, like talk about like the gender politics of this book. I think that would be a fascinating conversation that I am not qualified to speak on, but I am so excited to hear your two thoughts on this.
I have basically, the only notes I brought to this was my thoughts on gender and the patriarchy.
Yeah,
we can do a big gender conversation. The other things I definitely want to hit a little bit more of the King Arthur stuff.
I think the one thing I want to say last about the craft, which I'm getting from this retrospective of Brandon Sanderson talking about writing The Gathering Storm, is what I think is a kind of funny contradiction, which is he talks about one of the challenges. So he talks about one of the genius of Robert Jordan or parts is that there's all these side characters that he manages to have very distinct and unique personalities, which I'm not sure I agree with. But then in the same retrospective, he describes how one of the biggest challenges writing Gathering Storm was keeping track of which minor Aes Sedai was which.
Well, I don't understand why he would think that was frustrating. There are only 200 named Aes Sedai. Right.
That's like not even that much.
Don't worry about it.
And only 2,700 named characters.
Named characters in Wheel of Time. You said 2,700. I want to look for like the number.
It might be 28. I think it's like 2,770 something.
Number. Okay, 2,787. Okay.
Let's go. I was close.
Number of named characters in Game of Thrones, which to be fair is only how many books? 5 books right now, but
5 books.
Right
now, you sweet summer child.
And it has to do with 2,000. So Game of Thrones, which is at 5 books, is at 2,000 named characters.
Okay.
And then Wheel of Time is 22,787.
I don't know. I find weirdly, I find the Game of Thrones ones more parsable, even though oftentimes there's like 25 Roberts in Game of Thrones, and for some reason I find that more parsable than this just because I guess like it goes for a different style of fantasy names where like there's a bunch of apostrophes and like combinations, like and they're also, maybe they are, and I am just ignorant of whatever language that Robert Jordan is conlanging, but for Tolkien, like, there's a depth of language that he's going for there and inventing his own language and borrowing from a bunch of different stuff where it's still parsable to me as names. Like, Aragorn, like, works for me in a way that Lan-Al Morrigan doesn't, and I don't know why.
Well, I mean...
Like, I can't fully articulate why.
This is, I know I've mentioned this on this podcast before, but I feel like that's the eternal challenge of anyone doing fantasy world building. Both writing novels and also doing things like running D&D, which is making names that sound like they could feasibly be an actual real world, which of course is biased by like what your natural like human real life language is. But I always thought, but like obviously we're talking about books in English, so like we're talking about like words that sound like feasible real world names to an English speaking audience, and I feel like this book fails often.
Well, and also, I don't know where this book is borrowing for a lot of things, because, like, for example, the Aiel are supposed to be, like, a representation of the Cheyenne people, and, like, a real plot point, which is uncomfortable for me, is the fact that what happens to the Aiel is they split, and what happens to one faction of them is, like, textually the Trail of Tears. And Robert Jordan says it's based on the Trail of Tears, of, like, a group of people are forced out of their, like, natural homeland and into the desert. Now, it's really weird to make the victims of that in your story white people. Because the Aiel are all texturally white. They look like they're Irish. They're all very tall, white and redheaded.
I know this is purely just like, you know, fantasy bias, what they tend to do. I'm not gonna lie, I was imagining darker skin in my head whenever we were reading about
Were you imagining the Fremen?
I was imagining the Fremen. Yeah, I was thinking like Fremen, or like other fantasy analogs, Fremen, Gerudo, like, and then which of course are based on kind of a hodgepodge of like Middle Eastern.
One of the key texts to understand the Wheel of Time, weirdly, is Dune. But not only is it Dune, it's the 1984 Dune movie. I think is an essential thing to understand this text. Weirdly. Taylor, you wanted to say something.
Are there non-white people in this book at all? I just kind of assume... What? Oh.
Yeah. We never really get a description of characters, like, race.
Yeah. I just... they all were just... I guess...
I believe most of the Shan-Chan are black.
Black?
Yeah.
Black.
Black. I mean, let me get a...
I think I picked up on that. I think
official art of
Tuon. At least in my head, like the way a character got pictured, I think there was like one random Shan-Chan like side character that was described with I wish I could remember the exact wording, but it was like a hairstyle that's usually described with black characters, and so I was just like that's
Tuon.
That just like
that's
morphed
the Empress.
in my head.
May she live forever.
Wait, huh?
Yeah.
Wait, the Shan-Chan?
The people who have
I guess the word Chan I just took as East Asian.
The nation that's primary method of warfare is slavery of magic users.
Black people.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Also, like, this book really wants you to be sympathetic to the Shan-Chan. It's like, no. They are enslaving women specifically, and they tried to develop a new slavery technique to enslave the men. It's like, don't negotiate with them. What the fuck?
Were they trying to be sympathetic? I was looking at them as the villain the whole time.
The fact that we get so much of their interiority and the fact that Matt is married to Tuon, like, I can only think that we are supposed to be sympathetic to them on some level.
We are definitely supposed to see them as, like, another side of this interesting war, but ultimately, since they don't work for the dark one, they are considered on the other half of that, so they can be redeemable.
The miscommunication between Tuon and Rand, where they have the peace negotiation, I can only see as, like, supposed to be a tragedy. But yeah, there are a lot of black characters and people of color in this series. Like, a lot of the casting of The Wheel of Time made people angry in terms of the show.
Yeah.
But, like, it is a pretty racially diverse cast. It's just not brought up all that much.
Not at all. No.
I think just for quick context to listeners, what we're talking about the slavery thing is that like the thing that makes the Shan-chan like unique and kind of like dangerous is they use these collars. They find magic users, which are primarily women for plot reasons. They find magic users, collar them, and then use that collar to basically enforce obedience and like use them as magical weapons.
Also, it's specifically that each collared Aes Sedai, because the collars only work on women. There's a different kind of collar that was in the Age of Legends and is older, called a domination band, and that's the thing that gets put on Rand. And there's one or two of them in the world. They are much rarer than the collars for women.
Oh yeah, and we were talking about the White Tower plot kind of resolving like kind of suddenly. It was a Shan-chan attack where one of the primary goals of the attack on the White Tower was to capture and enslave as many Aes Sedai as possible to use in the war effort. And that's what happens to the Elida, like the previous Armerlin that's like kind of like the villain of that part of the story. Is she just gets captured and collared and now she's a slave warrior to the Shan-chan.
And it is absolutely worth noting that in the book where we get the most about this, or at least the most that I can remember, is in The Great Hunt, where Egwene is enslaved with one of these collars, and that's like a solid third of that book. The relationship has a like very fetishistic description. It is specifically a collared slave and a leash holder. There's a lot of that kind of language around there. There is also the fact that the relationship, even though it's specifically to inflict pain on and like enslavement onto it, the fact that there's like a sapphic undertone because it can only happen between two women, like a man cannot be a leash holder. And the reason for this is the leash holder is also a wizard, is also an Aes Sedai. They just don't know that. And Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine figure this out, that the people who can hold the leash are also women who can channel.
I mean, we do see this at the very end with Elida. She has a small POV where basically the conversation goes, "You're gonna be a good Aes Sedai, right? You're gonna be a good Aes Sedai for me." And then she like isn't, and then she gets like tortured, and you're like, "You're gonna be a good Aes Sedai." Like it's very kinky, like you said.
Yeah. And like, R.I.P. Robert Jordan, you would have loved Romantasy. Like,
we talked about it in the bonus episode, but there's a lot of like kinky undertones to this story that's like not good.
Robert Jordan did actually write a romance. Apparently it was awful. I have not read it. He wrote it under the pseudonym Reagan O'Neill. It's also worth noting, Robert Jordan is not his real name either, which is something I learned by reading the biography of him.
Interesting.
His name is James Oliver Rigney Jr. Apparently his reason for writing under a pseudonym is the only time he wanted to write under his own like birth name is if he was writing his own story about the Vietnam War, is the only time he would let himself write under his own name.
Interesting. Which
we will get to some Vietnam War stuff, probably talking about gender, but
fascinating. Weird tangent, but for whatever reason, I really understand that feeling. I do, obviously we talked about before, I do a lot of writing, and I kind of always told myself that if I ever was a published author, I would want to do it under a pseudonym, and I don't have any other specific reason other than just it feels right. It feels like what I should do.
Yeah.
But,
you have a pseudonym for yourself, Taylor?
I have this. I always knew that I want to publish under Taylor Lane, but I know that when I get married, I want to take my husband's last name, but I always want to publish under my maiden name, Taylor Lane. That's what I think, and I think that that's important to me in my identity, and that's like a way for me to hold on to my birth name in like a meaningful way to me.
I've heard that sentiment from like a lot of women, especially like now that I'm in law school, is that like, and also Maddie as well, like any degrees or any like major academic achievements they want under their birth name, even if they do intend to
in my personal life.
Share.
In my personal life, that's the only place where I want my legal name to matter at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also just what I think now. I have literally no clue what I'll think when the time comes, but I do.
Who knows what the future holds?
Exactly. Who knows what the future holds? But I am fairly certain I don't want to write under a pseudonym. I want to write under my name.
But anyway, speaking of that, like, brief topic that does touch on gender politics of the real world,
True.
let's touch on the gender politics of the Wheel of Time and whatever. Is there a name for the world of a Wheel of Time?
Earth. It is never given an official name, but it is supposed to be Earth. In the same way that Middle Earth is supposed to be like the prehistory of Earth. I guess the only thing that is worth noting is the fans of the Wheel of Time often call it Randland. Which, all right. It's not great. But again, Jordan never gives us one.
Anyway, the gender politics of Randland. I know. let's dig into it.
I have a whole thesis statement, and
I am so excited to hear it. This is the part I've been looking forward to the most in recording this.
This is probably so. This book tells us that this is supposed to be a matriarchy. Yes, Graham?
Yes, or at least that is the conversation around the Wheel of Time. Is everyone is saying this is a matriarchal society. Robert Jordan did such a good job showing the gender oppression of men and having that be the reversal of the assumed defaults is how the conversation around this goes around it. And also, this is something that Jordan said was one of his goals.
The in-universe, and just to make it super clear, the in-universe justification for this, like by the author, is that because until very, very recently in the events of this story, if you were male and could channel magic, you would go destructively crazy. The only people who have access to magical power are women, and this leads to like a lot of very powerful women magical societies that like control the world.
I mean, this is since Luz Theron tainted Sidene.
Like
in the Age of Legend, which is like tons of male channelers.
But the event that leads to women being the only one that can safely use magic is like thousands of years ago. So this book takes place thousands of years into a society where only women have magical power that can be used safely. That's the context into this whole like matriarchal society.
All right, let's get into it. So, I titled my notes, Upholding the Patriarchy, Women Remain Powerless.
Yeah.
So, something that really, I think the easiest way to begin this discussion is kind of the initiation that made me realize how kind of powerless or realize the patriarchy and how deeply established it is into this world. I found myself extremely frustrated reading the differences between the women's chapters and the men's chapters, because throughout this entire book, all the women have tried to do is uphold rules, the rules that have been maintained for this system. They are working very hard within these rules, whereas every time we get a man's chapter, the men they just constantly try to thwart any rules that the women tried to uphold. The women are the one that say, we need to do it this way. This is how it's always been done. And I'm trying to keep it going this way. And every time the men look at that and go, I'm going to ignore those rules. Those rules don't apply to me. They're not convenient for me, so I'm going to ignore them. And they get away with it every time. Women don't have this
and to build on that, I think Robert Jordan thinks the men are right for doing that.
Yeah, I would say that is rewarded narratively every time.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Wheel of Time, women completely derive all of their power from upholding and maintaining the status quo or doctrines that come before them. They don't have any power within themselves. The only power they have is from the power of the pre-established status quo.
Mm-hmm.
This is at the part of the notes where I kind of go into like why this is like such a patriarchy and why it's definitely not a matriarchy at all. Let's talk about, so we didn't talk about Aitoralda at all because he was only really in the beginning of this book, but Aitoralda is a rebel leader.
He's running like a guerrilla war against the invading Shan Chan into his homeland.
So Aitoralda is this rebel general who is very respected. So I was thinking, let's look at a woman who's in his exact position, Egwene. Egwene is the leader of a rebel Aes Sedai faction. Now, let's imagine for a second that Ituralda's soldiers were not allowed to lie, were not allowed to use their weapons as a weapon. They couldn't use it in any harmful way. And if he didn't set up his camp in exactly the same way other people set up their camp, his authority would be thwarted. That's the position Egwene is in. The only respectable way that women are allowed to have power by men is if they go through this bureaucratic climbing of the ranks that men really in this book have shown over and over again don't have to do.
At the end of it, it's supposed to be a matriarchy, but at the end of the day, the men are all generals with armies, and armies continue to be like the real political power. And like the women who have...
Anytime we get a character who has a position of power that is not a military one, like anytime we meet like a mayor, it's like a man, almost exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have like the Empress,
there's the Queen of Andor.
Yeah, the Queen of Andor. There's like the Empress of the evil Shan Empire is a woman.
May she live forever.
May she live forever, I guess.
They say this all the time in that book. How do you miss that?
I'm tired. I don't know.
I did not catch that at all.
But no, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like this story does believe that ultimately the power is the people who can do violence, is the armies. Because like it still does, like, because that's how things get resolved, that's how action takes place, that's what all the concern is about. All the plot revolves around, the moving of these armies and what's important. And while the Aes Sedai are supposedly powerful, they're powerful in these like advisory roles.
They're
Go ahead.
They're powerful. They're only allowed to be powerful because they have limits on them that make their power more comfortable to men.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
100%.
And it's insane to me that the Aes Sedai would agree to this. Because by the end of Luz Theron, by the end of that age, women have a monopoly on state violence. And I think that is a super interesting starting state for, like, an alternate history. Women are the only people in the world who can do magic. Granted, their magic is less powerful, but if no one else can do magic, they have a monopoly on state violence.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, the Aes Sedai use the Oath Rod and give themselves a bunch of arbitrary limitations on themselves so people trust them more. And it's like, I don't think that's how a matriarchy would work.
It's treated as which I can see in a weird roundabout way, in a weird, monarchist libertarian way. This is treated as like a noble, how they get the consent of the people to rule them or whatever. But it's essentially like the condition of the Aes Sedai existing is that they take these magically binding, like we're saying these oaths, like these are like magically binding. Like if you've taken this oath, unless some crazy magic removes it, like you physically cannot will yourself into breaking these oaths. And these oaths are, you cannot lie, you cannot use your magic as a weapon or to make a weapon, and I think there's one more.
The 3 oaths of the Aes Sedai: to speak no word that is not true, to make no weapon with which one man may kill another, never to use the one power as a weapon except against dark friends or shadow spawn, or in the last extreme defense of her life, the life of her warder or another Aes Sedai. Egwene literally can't go kill another Aes Sedai.
It is such bullshit. Men just get to be honest. Men are assumed honest. But lying, conniving women, we would never trust a word they said. And so the only fucking semblance of power that they have to grab onto is like, see men, we're not lying. We like physically can't lie anymore, so you have to listen to us. But like, daddy's never gonna fucking listen to you. Look around.
And they're still treated as deceptive, like more than once. I mean, we talked a little bit about like we liked General Bryn and Saway's like relationship or whatever. But there was also a little bit of him being like, yeah, but like, I know you guys can't literally lie, but I know you guys are really tricky and able to like speak around the truth. Like say things that are technically true, but like are still like white lies and like kind of like.
But I think that the only reason that they have a true equal relationship is because she doesn't have the fucking oath and she's allowed to fucking lie. Their speech is literally policed and they police themselves. The fucking amazing thing about the patriarchy is the way that they can get, the best slave is the one who fucking enforces the rules on themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
they have gotten the women to just turn on each other and enforce it on themselves. When just look around, like they are. I was writing my notes and I was like, all of them work against their own interests, and I didn't know why. Like I was like, the women are working against their own interests, and I can't figure out why it feels that way. And then I realized they're all working against their own interests because they keep upholding the Tower laws. Like these laws are not helping you to actually be powerful.
And it's one of those things where, once again, and I feel like I say this all the time with these kind of themes, and it bears repeating, if that was like the villain of the story, that would be interesting. If we had one character to recognize that and kind of go, wait, this is bullshit. This is a problem. This is something that's like hampering our ability to do good and like actually make positive change in the world. That could have been a very interesting thrust of the story, but it's assumed the default like good. It's assumed the default like this is how it has to work. This is the most morally good way for it to work. And like the people who try to defy that are default the enemies. Like one of the things that makes the Black Sisterhood, the Aes Sedai that are secretly working for the Dark One, one of the things that makes them evil.
The Black Aja, you're confusing it with the Sword of Truth.
The Black Aja. Watch the bonus episode, hear my rant about the Sword of Truth. The Black Aja is the fact that they don't have the oaths. They like some magic. They like some magic of the Dark Ones.
They do have oaths. They just have oaths to the Dark One.
Oh yeah, but they don't have the same.
They
oaths.
can lie.
They don't have the oaths about lying. They don't have the oaths about not hurting.
Yeah.
I mean, the White Tower is like an egregious
institution.
An egregious like point that I'm trying to make. The Wise Ones, the Aiel Wise Ones, exact same shit. Literally
They
exact
also suck.
same. They have the same like strict upholding of things, and their strict upholding of their doctrines is literally the only way that men actually see them as powerful.
And also this strict adherence to doctrine. God, no. Well, one of the insane things, the reason Rand is the leader of the Aiel is, one, he's the Dragon Reborn, and the Aiel are the people of the dragon, and like they owe their allegiance to him on some level. But also, even if the Aiel are described as white, they are often racialized as non-white.
Like the Irish.
Yes, like the Irish.
like bringing it back to the previous comparison.
Yeah, actually. You know what? Fair. But they are racialized as non-white in a way that, like, is different. Like, they are people of the desert. There are a lot of Arab stereotypes, like, within the Aiel as well, and Romani stereotypes. Or I guess travelers is the acceptable term these days. One of the key pivotal scenes is Rand explains the secret history of the Aiel to the Aiel, where he goes, I know your actual history. This is what actually happened. What you believe is wrong. And that's how he ends up the chief of chiefs, the Karnakan.
Oh, no.
God. Oh, my
God.
Oh, no.
And, like...
And he could just be saying anything.
I mean, he has a vision, but it's still...
But to the Aiel as an institution...
Oh, absolutely.
He could be saying anything.
And, like, yeah. And there's a bunch of rebel Aiel who are like, fuck this guy. And they try to take over...
like
Rand's
the Dark
territory
Aiel or whatever. They're given some name like that.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, well...
The Shadow Aiel or something like that.
Yeah, it's Shido.
Shido. No, God.
The plot of the Fires of Heaven and the Shadow Rising are some of the funniest misunderstandings of Dune I've ever read. Yeah. Like, remember how in Dune, like, the whole thesis is that Paul is a bad man, and, like, Rand shows up and gives a blessed rainstorm to the Aiel, and to prove to them that he is to be trusted. And it's like, did you miss the whole book, Jordo?
Dune is literally Paul is a white savior derogatory. Like, that's the plot of Dune. No, God.
Well, no, as we all know, like, all of our analysis of Dune is wrong, because the correct reading of Dune is Frank Herbert being like, God, I love cocaine. The only thing I love more than cocaine is the boundless light of Islam.
No. One thing I want to say about the wise woman plot of this book, which is the Aiel. What was her name? Like, it began with an A.
Aviendra.
Yeah, Aviendra. So horny for Rand, so down bad for Rand. The whole book. That's her entire character of this book. She's trying to become a wise one, and like they keep like the way they try to teach her is they're like punishing her, and she like doesn't know what she's being punished for, and so they punish her harder. And the way they punish her is by making her do meaningless tasks, which are like shameful, like. You're doing all this work, and this work doesn't matter. Like, you're not helping anything by doing this work. Like, Go pick up the stone and just move it across camp, and then pick it up and move it back. Like, shit like that.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, it was like, the twist of that storyline was not just bad, but it was predictably bad. Like, I guessed that was going to be a twist from the beginning, and then it was just as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was just like, the whole point of that storyline is that the lesson they were trying to teach her was to like stand up for herself and basically call out that the punishment is bullshit. And that was the lesson but then that's almost contrary to the whole system, Taylor, that you're describing, which is like, they're supposed to be following the rules. It's like, okay, you learn this lesson about how don't accept these meaningless punishments. Now let's go and follow these meaningless rules.
Yeah, it's never culminated into a where in real life, I mean, women would actually genuinely take it to. I mean, they're supposed to be these women of logic.
Yeah.
Women can't be logical. They've got too many vaginas.
Too many vaginas. God, that other scene that we talked about in the bonus episode.
This shit all sucks.
If people want to read a story that's very cathartic because it has the exact same themes of like an oppressed people being the tools of their own oppression, but then it's cathartic in the sense that it's actually includes a lot of calling out how awful the system is and fighting against it, I yet again recommend the Broken Earth trilogy.
I hate also how much the strongest women in this book always seem to... Like Tuin, the Empress, like,
may she live forever.
Like, truly, let Matt go. He's a piece of shit who doesn't believe you should have rights. Like,
Matt is a real fun piece of shit, but he's a piece of shit.
He's a piece of shit who, I mean,
like a Kavoth
he
character.
He doesn't even try to not be misogynistic. He is openly, blatantly misogynistic. At least the rest of them pretend like they're not. Matt just
his opening line. Which honestly is kind of refreshing. Just to have
someone fucking look the system in the mouth and just say what's actually going on.
Yeah. Just the fact that Matt's literally his opening line is basically women be shopping is like
right.
Like I think his opening line is either blood and bloody ashes or just him being like fucking women.
Yeah, it's like I hate women.
Is it time you open up a Matt chapter? All women know how to do is be bisexual, lie, and charge they phone. End of chapter.
Like, I just was like, and she's down bad for that guy? That guy is the worst. Egwene, I liked Egwene.
And granted, I will say, Matt is weirdly more misogynistic when Sanderson takes over him. Like, part of his arc over the past couple of books is him growing to be, like, more respectful towards women. But also, like, misogyny is, like, fundamental to the world. And a lot of people complain about how he wrote Matt. And I'm like, yeah, this is different. But also, I don't think this is a fundamentally wrong understanding of the character either.
Actually, that brings me to a point, because we've been talking about Robert Jordan this whole thing. But, like, this book was written by Brandon Sanderson. And we talked about
Primarily.
And we talked about how the beginning where Brandon Sanderson was pretty strict. Like, he was doing his best to expand on world building and stuff. But he was very strictly constrained to, like, he's not going to contradict anything from Robert Jordan. And I'm wondering, mostly from you, Graham, because Taylor and I haven't read any of the written fully by Robert Jordan books, how much this book seems to be Brandon Sanderson, like, being constrained by the world building that already existed, but to what degree he almost, I don't want to say fights against it, because I don't know if he fights against it. He does seem to be a fan of these books, but how much he seems to be doing his own reaction to these systems, and how much it seems to be him trying to go another direction while still staying within the bounds of the world building he's locked into.
I would say there's some pushback. I would say, while Robert Jordan, a lot of people think he breaks ground with his portrayal of women in his series, which we obviously disagree with. But the sort of work that he's doing, Sanderson, I think, is writing the women better than Jordan is doing it. I would also like to point out that Sanderson, I don't know if he does it in this book because they're not main characters, but for the majority of the Wheel of Time, the only gay characters that exist are primarily bisexual women, and Sanderson adds 2 gay men. And there's a couple of things like that where he's building on these things and trying to make it more fundamentally equitable, like is a lot of the work of what he's doing. Like, he's still constrained by the world, and I think he is pushing back on it on some level. But also, we have to keep in mind that this is Sanderson in 2008, 2009, and he's still... And Sanderson, I don't think, is particularly quote-unquote woke at this point. He is yet to portray a gay character. The first gay character he portrays, actually, is in The Wheel of Time, now that I think about it. The next one we're going to see, I think, is probably in Stormlight, right?
Maybe. I'm trying to remember when in Stormlight it's super
Regardless,
obvious textual.
Whatever. Yeah. Matt, to me, it kind of seemed like he had a reason, though, to backslide into more misogyny, though, because he is bitching about how he's like a married man now, and he's trying. To me, the misogyny doesn't seem like the misogyny seems almost performative to the point where he's trying to prove to himself and everyone else he's still misogynistic, and so he like dials it up really high. When on the inside, he's like trying to prove to all these other men, he's like, she's a ball and chain. I swear, I don't really like her.
Yeah.
Whereas if you read between the lines, it's like he's frustrated that he actually does care so much about Tuon. He just literally doesn't want anyone else to think that. That's too much of a blow to his pride.
To answer your question, Jack, I have a quotation from Origins of the Wheel of Time. This is on page 39 in my copy. My goal, Brandon later said, was not to fix the Wheel of Time. My goal was to give it the best ending possible for the fans. That said, he still found places to try to update the image of Randland in ways that he expected Jordan might have done if he'd lived long enough. The Wheel of Time had already depicted some limited same-sex relationships between women, for instance, most especially in the novel prequel New Spring. There were no gay men, but there were gay men in the real world, so I added them in. Similarly, Brandon felt that the idea that female privilege, as the typical experience of life in Randland, a reversal of the male privilege that characterized Jordan's generation, was quite progressive for Jordan's time, but I thought in reality there should be much less belligerence for how it manifested itself. As a result, he tried to make subtle shifts in the ways that men and women interacted with each other as the last battle approached.
Okay, that's interesting.
But again, he's trying to execute on Jordan's vision, but he's making a couple of things. And not to keep harping on the gender, but I feel like we do have to.
I mean, that's the most interesting part of this book.
So one thing I did check.
Real quick, I don't want to totally lose Taylor's point she was making about Matt being like the performative masculinity, which I think is like an interesting one. Taylor, did you have anything else to say about that?
No, that was pretty much.
Oh, okay.
I kind of finished that thought. But I mean, I have more to say about the gender and stuff.
Of course, so do I. It's something I did check. I don't think we're going to encounter this character again. I don't know if you guys will ever encounter her at all, but there is technically a trans character in the Wheel of Time, and it sucks.
Ooh.
It sucks really bad. So, Arengar, one of the Forsaken.
Starting off strong.
Yes. One thing I will say, I do like that all of the Forsaken are hot and bisexual. That is good, actually. Like, I'm fine with the villains being queer-coded, but not this one. Arengar is a reincarnation of Balthamel, who is one of the Forsaken. Balthamel gets killed at the end of the Eye of the World. And then, as divine punishment for being unable to kill the Dragon Reborn, the Dark One imprisons Balthamel in the body of a woman.
Who the fuck thought this was a fucking matriarchy? Like, actually, we need to talk. Like, actually. We need to have... I have hands. I have 2 hands. We need to talk.
Between the 3 of us, there are 6.
Anyway, I'm getting a very, like, early Forgotten Realms vibes from what they believe a matriarchy means. From the fandom and and the author. Like, it's the same people who look at the drow and we're like, that's a matriarchy. Like, that's what a matriarchy would be.
I said in the bonus episode that all these women are men with vaginas. I've thought on that a little bit more. I'm not sure that's completely correct. I think that's mostly a joke, not like a.
I don't know that it's fully wrong though either.
I know, like it's not fully correct, but it's also not fully wrong. And like when I think of like a matriarchy, I think of a place where people are allowed to, that femininity is seen as a strength, and that being matronly is also seen as honorable and allowed to happen. Whereas this is certainly a society where, especially like in the Aes Sedai and stuff like that, being matronly, being, I guess, like not like compassionate, but like wanting to, I guess, like take care of others and stuff like that, that is something that that is not exactly honorable. It's not something that is upheld as honor. Honor is still on the battlefield and killing and being logical and being reasonable. Where's the Aja that is caring and compassion and like listens to your emotions above all? I don't know.
And what's frustrating is there are moments where I think this series comes close to making an interesting claim. In the opening books, basically everyone wants to run Moraine and Aes Sedai out of the Two Rivers. And Moraine responds by giving like a 3-page history of what the actual location of the Two Rivers is, and how it used to be Manetheren and like this great city that used to have tons of Aes Sedai and all these things. She's basically like, you people are a disgrace to your own history in not trusting me and like disrespecting women in this way. Again, that is the exception. Mm-hmm. That is not the rule. Most of the time, they may not be as open about it as Matt, but most of the time people are like, women be shopping.
Yeah. No. I mean,
men are oppressed because women get to cast spells that aren't allowed to hurt people, but can cast spells and we can't.
Well, the fact that women have a monopoly on magical state violence does make for like an interesting point of genre bending, but it's not explored very well. Mm-mm. Like, I think patriarchal society is so ingrained in Jordan's worldview that he can't undo it beyond a surface level.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
And also the fact that he's trying to do this gender imbalance where men are oppressed. But the fact that the gender imbalance is rooted in something actually wrong in the world fucking sucks. Women aren't oppressed because they turn into superpowered monsters. And, like, even though the description of male channelers is, like, gross and upsetting to read about, like, the first time we get to a description of what happens to a man who is stilled, it's fucking rough. Like, he's not a person anymore. But, like, it's gross and upsetting to imagine. But on some level, I agree with the Red Aja. If every male channeler except one is doomed to irreparable harm to the world, it doesn't seem that unreasonable to have a governing body regulating like that.
Yeah.
Regulating male channeling. And none of this maps onto real-world gender oppression. And, like, the existence of Forkroot complicates this, but Forkroot is rediscovered during this series. Mm-hmm. So it's not like they could have just been like, oh, hello, man who channels. Here's your monthly prescription. That, like, come pick up Forkroot from Camelin or the White Tower, and then you can go home and, like, have a 90-day supply or whatever. I think Forkroot is discovered in, like, book 5 or 6.
Oh, I didn't oh, wait, the way it's talked about was like I thought it was like a traditional medicinal thing that people just knew about.
It gets rediscovered, or maybe it's not revealed until book 5 or 6, but I hope it's rediscovered, because if it's something they had access to the whole time, and like maybe this is the only bit of insightful gender commentary, but the oppression of men, as cartoonishly bad as it's written, didn't need to happen either, because they could just hand out prescriptions instead of fundamentally like destroying the souls of these men who can do magic.
I like, you keep saying that men are oppressed, and I'm genuinely confused.
They're not.
Like, I have no clue what you're talking about. I have no clue.
It's less present in this one.
Yeah, in what world these men are not equal or are not less than.
The only way it ever seems to appear is in the fact that men who are born with the ability to use magic are treated horribly. And that's by this female-only magic society, but that's it. In terms of like broader society, it's literally like the way men are oppressed is every once in a while there's a man who's born as a nuclear bomb waiting to go off, and this women-only society like fucks with them to stop it.
the only reason they're oppressed is because they're, like, crying to mommy about it. Like, that's not that big of a deal. Like, that's not, I don't know. Like, am I wrong? Like, that, like, they are genuinely going to have harm. There's no gray
it's
area
objectively
about
correct.
it. Like, if there was a gray area where actually they're getting killed for no reason because of a small chance that they could go off, then I could see some sort of area where they're like they
it's
could
a reality.
like that could be it. But since it's so black and white, it's so just like obvious. Like, what are you crying about?
Yeah, it's like it's an objective reality of the magic of this world that if you are until like in one of the books, is not this one, it's one of the ones we didn't read. Until one of the books, like I almost said Richard because I'm still thinking Sword of Truth. Rand magically cleans the male magic, like solves this problem. Right. Until that point, yeah, it's an objective reality of the magic of this world that if you are a man born with the ability to do magic, you will inevitably go crazy and cause incredible amounts of damage. Like you are a nuclear bomb of magic that will eventually go off if you are a man.
Yeah.
At that
born
point,
with magic.
It's just basic risk management. That is not like
that's
what?
not oppression of men. That's a tragedy. That's a oh my god, it's horrible that like this is a thing that happens. But that's not a matriarchy oppression of men. That's a wow, that's a crazy tragedy that because of this event in the past, like every 1 in 1,000 men are born as a nuclear bomb that might go off.
Because if it's in this society, realistically, if the roles were reversed, women would be genuinely far worse off if the women channelers were bombs ready to go off. That would color all of womanhood. They're looking, whereas because they're looking for a scapegoat. I mean, historically, like men will find, or the patriarchy, not men, the patriarchy will find any reason to say, like, oh, women are bad. This is why we can control their bodies. We can control them now. How exciting. Like, let's jump on this. Whereas women rightfully know what that's like. And in the flip of it, when the male, magic went off, they didn't hold all of men accountable for that. What a fucking odd and weird, like, jump of logic there. Like, that seems so strange.
Once again, everyone who hasn't read Broken Earth Trilogy if you want to read a book that does these same themes, but, like, really well.
Actually, speaking of, I'll put in now that as I was reading through the books of the Wheel of Time, and still haven't read all of them. I'm familiar with all of them, but I'm still not fully caught up. But one of the things I did is, since there are 15 books of the Wheel of Time, I created a list of 51 books you could read instead, down to an accuracy of about 1,000 words in terms of the word counts of the books.
I genuinely, like, the moment I start having more free time to read books outside of for this project, I am going to be looking through that, like, to find books I haven't read.
Yeah, and there's a lot in there that I specifically tried to choose things that I think are in conversation with the Wheel of Time and stuff that the Wheel of Time doesn't do as well as some of these. Because here's the saddest thing to me. The Wheel of Time is so in conversation with King Arthur. And you know what's cooler? Actually reading the stories of King Arthur. Gawain is nowhere near as cool as Gawain. Mm. And Galad is nowhere near as cool as Galahad. And Rand is nowhere near as cool as King Arthur. And, like, what's fascinating about King Arthur, and one of my biggest disappointments with the Wheel of Time, is we get to follow King Arthur from when he's a fucking baby all the way up until his death. And we get to do that. We get to follow Rand from the time that he's, like, 19 or 20 to the time that he's maybe 22, 23. Like, that's the length of time the Wheel of Time covers, is about 3 years. Mm-hmm. And also, the first 2 books take place over a year. So, the last fucking 14 books or whatever.
Yeah.
12. The last 12 books take place over the course of like a year and a half. And it's a lot to happen in a year and a half. And it's so disappointing to me because, like, you get to, in King Arthur, you get to see, like, the problems he has when he ages. Like, you get to see him be a not very good husband. And because of that, his wife cheats on him. And because of that, Camelot collapses.
Yeah.
Like, it collapses due to a very real human problem of like, oh, I was a bad husband, and because of that my wife left me, and because of that no one respects me. And granted, that's one version of the death of King Arthur, and there's a ton of different versions, but the fact that there's no sense of scale or time for this epic is just so disappointing.
Yeah.
If there's anything to get from this podcast, like, read The Once and Future King, I beg of you. Instead of reading these, honestly, read Mistborn. For all the criticism I have for Mistborn, there is more there than there is here.
I do believe, like, I know in general we've been really critical of Sanderson's work in a way that's really deserved in a lot of ways, but like writing Wheel of Time is definitely the best thing to happen to Sanderson's career, and it also is resulting in a better version of Wheel of Time existing.
Yeah, even in these small ways.
A better epic fantasy author coming to the forefront.
Like, again, I have a ton of problems with Sanderson. Like, oftentimes we are deeply critical, but we are still broadly positive on Sanderson. And, like, at the end of the day, if not for this podcast, I probably never would have picked up another Sanderson book again, because I had an experience where I was so angry reading one of the books that I, like, genuinely threw my phone across the room of how frustrated I got with the book. And, like, if not for this podcast and doing this sort of in-depth analysis, I find him frustrating in a way where I don't think I could engage with him. This is part of the reason I wanted to do this, is so I could learn to understand why people like him. I'm trying for Jordan. I am trying, but I don't know if I'll ever get there. And to go back to our point about gender, the fact that Jordan never really gets into this sort of deeper understanding of gender, other than these are the fundamental and unshakable truths about men and women, the only two genders, and here's how society might be different if women were the only one who knew how to use nukes, is extremely disappointing. And I don't want to receive the criticism that Jordan was writing from a different era and time. Robert Jordan was writing in 1990. Like, Gender Trouble came out the same year that The Eye of the World came out. And obviously, the man was born in the 1940s. He's not going to have the same perspective as anyone. But also, like, I made this point in the bonus episode of, like, he does so much research into everything else, but he just accepts gender as an unshakable truth about the world.
Yeah.
And to the point where his magic system is based on gender, the essential difference between two genders.
And I mean, also, even that, the magic system within that, the fact that women have to surrender to the magic, whereas the men reach out and grab it. It's like, that's...
Whoa, hold on.
I didn't actually know that. Wait, that didn't come up.
Yeah.
That didn't come up in this book we read.
Yeah.
Hold on.
That's new for...
Ew!
Live reaction. Taylor and I learning this.
Ew! What the fuck?
I mean, it's often memed on, where, like, the Wheel of Time fans will be like, the description for how you have to learn how to channel as a woman is you have to surrender to the power, let it fill you up, and then you can redirect it. Whereas generally the descriptions for the channeling of Saidin, the male half of the one power, is like the men being like, all right, Saidin is gonna kick your ass, so you better kick its ass first.
I'm penetrating into the Saidin.
Yes! Like,
ejaculating it on everyone.
Basically, it is so... It's like, the description of the magic is so sexually written for the... And, like, sexually violent as well.
It's kink all the way down.
Yeah.
Also, something else that definitely Sanderson stops doing, but Jordan does all the time in the books, is the women describe how orgasmic the taking in of the magic is, because it feels physically pleasurable. They often want to reach out and touch the power just to feel good.
What?
Mm-hmm.
That's, a lot.
Robert Jordan. Who?
My favorite libertarian monarchist.
Like, how did this book series get this popular? Like, genuine, like, /gen.
Oh.
What is, like...
That's the thing.
What?
Timing or something? I don't know. It's usually how it works.
I don't know. And, like...
I guess were people desperate for something coming off of Star Wars, maybe? Or they wanted something that touched those Tolkien themes. They were desperate for that. Like,
I think part of it is, like, Robert Jordan, I don't think he would consider himself a feminist, but I don't think his work is. And I think part of it is, like,
free.
I don't want to say that there wasn't interesting interesting writing being done by women in genre work, because obviously there was. Ursula Le Guin, Mercedes Lackey, tons of women. One of my absolute favorite authors of all time, Catherine Kerr, writing Daggerspell. But I feel like a lot of female genre authors, and I don't have a ton of evidence for this, so if a listener wants to come in and correct me, please feel free. But I feel like a lot of female genre authors would, in order to try to appeal to a male audience, would write about men. Like Mercedes Lackey's most popular trilogy is maybe the Last Harold Maids trilogy, or at least that's one of the ones that's most notable, and that's specifically about a man. It's a gay man, but like it's a male perspective. A Wizard of Earthsea, Le Guin is writing in the 60s. That is a trilogy about Ged, who is a man, and it's not until like 1990 when she writes Tahanu and returns to Earthsea, or maybe it's 1994, I can't remember, but she returns to Earthsea and writes a whole book about women in the setting of Earthsea, and she's like, Earthsea was good, but like we have to address this now. And if anything can be said to be good about Robert Jordan, I think he's one of the first genre authors who centers women as like a key focal point for these fantasy series. Now, he doesn't do a good job of this. Like, these women, in avoiding the stereotypes of the fantasy genre of the time, Jordan is shoehorning himself into writing women largely the same way for all of his female characters. They're all beautiful, stubborn, take-no-nonsense girl bosses, which is just a different kind of male fantasy.
Yeah.
But again, I am not an expert on genre work. I read a lot of it, but most of my knowledge is wrapped up in Shakespeare and his contemporaries. So the fact that he's centering women might be notable in this way.
It might also, it might also be as simple as like a matter of timing plus a matter of kind of a similar way that like, a lot of shonens and anime communities will get popular, where people, like there was an audience hungry for just big, meaty fantasy. And that's kind of something Wheel of Time was off. And there might also then just be a lot of like luck and coincidence involved, like why Wheel of Time as opposed to some of the other like big, meaty fantasies came out at the same time got popular. But it might just be that like, I know that there's a contingent of fantasy readers and fantasy fans that they see a book, they see 14,000 page book. Oh yeah. And they'll like it for that.
Yeah.
They'll like it for the sheer volume and scale.
I think anime is honestly probably a really good point of comparison for the Wheel of Time. Like, I can so easily see this being a animated series. That would be the only way to adapt it. I mean, I know there's a whole television show that has 2 seasons. There are things that would be more acceptable in that sort of... You just got to deal with some level of anime bullshit, where you would be like, oh yeah, Rand has a harem. Of course he does. Rand has 3 wives.
Every time friends recommend anime to me, I'm glad you brought it, because that's fully my experience, is that I am not a huge anime watcher, but there are a few animes I've watched and really enjoyed, and over again the barrier is the stuff that's good about this anime overshadow anime bullshit I know is going to be there and that I can't stand.
Yeah.
That is over and over again my experience with anime. Is like, man, Full Metal Alchemist I really like, and I like because the good parts are better than the anime bullshit it does that's still there.
And also, Full Metal Alchemist, relatively minor on the anime bullshit in general. Arakawa is better than every other shonen writer. She's incredible. Although, shout out to Toriyama since he died. Dragon Ball is also better than the Wheel of Time.
Actually, this is going back a couple
Rand should have had a Vegeta.
Can we take a bathroom break?
Sure.
I think we're also probably close to wrapping up. Imagine.
Kind of.
All right, bathroom break.
What was the point you wanted to make? I'll let you pause for a second and eat some of that, but what was the point you wanted to make when we return to the episode?
Not really a point, mostly just a question, because we were talking about, like, this book trying to do a matriarchy and doing it very poorly. You're far more well-read than I, and I was just kind of curious, like, is there a book that does matriarchy in an interesting way? Like, as a reflection of patriarchy, is there such a book that you're aware of?
I'll put this at the end, or maybe I'll put it here. Who knows? I'll throw it in more back.
Oh, this is not good. My fridge is...
The food isn't good?
This fridge is too cold. This is ice. This is frozen.
You can change that setting, Jack.
I know, but that doesn't help with this right here now.
Then a fantasy with a matriarchal society, maybe The Power is a book by... What the fuck is that? cover. That's awful. That's not the original cover. There we go. The Power by Naomi Alderman. But it's a science fiction novel from Naomi Alderman, and the premise is women develop the ability to release electrical jolts from their fingers, which allows them to become the dominant sex. And it's not handled perfectly. One of the weaknesses of it, I think, is it imagines that if women suddenly developed power, that they would seek revenge and also institute an oppressive and brutal matriarchy. But it is handled more interestingly than, I think, the one in the Wheel of Time. That's not to say that I think any particular gender having a monopoly on violence would lead to a good outcome. There are studies that show that female CEOs in positions of power like abuse men under their jurisdiction. Now, granted, that may just be like this is power in the system we all live in and capitalism and all that. But in terms of a fantasy book that specifically engages in matriarchy, I'm trying to think of any other ones. That's one that's like really contemporary.
Something I really thought about is like, what is the worst part of the patriarchy? What would be the equivalent? If he wanted to oppress his men in the same way that women are oppressed, realistically, he should have stripped men of their choices. That is the pinnacle of the crux of it, is that if men were truly oppressed, it should have been, well, you need to stay home, you need to take care of the kids, like we need someone down there, and I'm doing all this magic, I can't be doing all that, like you need to stay home. You are unfit for the military. You are unfit for leadership. It's time that you like go in the home, and I expect you to make dinner, and I expect you to raise the children and stuff like that. What's important about that is the lack of choice. Mm-hmm. Men in the Wheel of Time have a whole lot of choice. They can become generals. They can join the army. They can be leaders. Where women are given better choices, it's really not enough to call it even. Like, what about the women who don't channel? What choices do they have? Because I didn't notice really any generals who weren't Aes Sedai. There are no generals who are not Aes Sedai.
The Shan Chan had some important military figures that were women, but I think that was it.
Yeah,
that's
and
true.
Also the other thing that's worth noting is there are exceptions to this, like the ruler of Andor is always a woman. That passes matrilineally. But that's an exception.
Yeah, and another to my mind, which, you know, Taylor, you gave a very excellent kind of breakdown. There's probably also an element of in a matriarchy that's like a true reflection of a patriarchy, there'd be like the assumed inferiority of men then. Mm-hmm. Like it's like this kind of prevailing attitude of a man who succeeds is an exception.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not there. And also the fact that ultimately in the Wheel of Time, the highest possible goal for anything is heterosexual union.
True.
The fact that all of the best feats of magic are done by men and women together, at its best, might be some level of like, oh, look at this. The strongest form of magic is unlocked between gender cooperation. But I specifically say heterosexual union because it often requires bonding, which is a kind of magic in the Wheel of Time that is specifically on some level romantic. Mm-hmm. Rand is bonded to 4 women, 3 of which are his wives, and one of which is a woman who bonds him as her warder. And Rand is upset by this, not because I don't think he would have completely objected to bonding with this woman, but because she bonds him as her warder, as in the Dragon Reborn is my servant. And that's the part that rubs him wrong, is like, oh, I'm an inferior to a woman in this way. And basically every character ends up with a wife or a husband.
Oh, I don't think this called out directly, but that just reminded me in terms of like Rand's attitude towards women. There was like, there was so much like emphasis on the fact that Rand refuses to kill or harm or torture women, like as a strict rule. Like they've captured this Forsaken, literally like an avatar of darkness, someone who's spent the last 3,000 years perfecting the best ways to cause pain to people. Like that is her thing. She is the leading authority on torture. That is her whole thing.
She's a sadist and a masochist.
Sadist and a masochist. And
she says she's really looking forward to the torture, actually, is one of the things she says.
And they need to get this information out of her. And Rand is a complete, which, I am a big believer that torture is not like a good thing. But Rand has this incredibly hardline no torture stance because she's a woman. Nothing else. No, like if it was a man, yeah, torture away. But it comes across very much as Rand seeing all the women around him as fragile special flowers
that are
that like
are like
that it would be especially cruel to harm that he doesn't apply to anybody else.
Yeah, it's incredibly misogynistic. Like, it is this weird... I mean, all of the men in this fucking book want to be white knights so bad. They want their women to be damsels in distress. And they're, I think, disappointed when the women aren't damsels in distress. Like, oh my god, like Gawain and Egwene. I loved...
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
I loved Egwene's story because Egwene was like, shut up, man. Like, I didn't want to be saved. You had this weird perception in your head that you needed to save me and you wanted to be my white knight. Dog.
Fuck off.
Stop.
I got it.
Like, I don't give a fuck.
I have it handled. Leave me alone. You're messing with my plan.
I'm not a damsel in distress.
Taylor, I know something that happens between the two of them. You are going to be madder about that thing than I think anything we've encountered in this podcast so far.
Oh,
so look forward to June and A Memory of Lights.
Oh no.
You thought the roast of Elend was bad.
Gawain is the worst. For the record, Jack, in the same way that the Sanderson community has fuck Moash, fuck Gawain is very similar.
Interesting. Oh, so it's a community endorsed hating this guy.
I mean, a lot of people still like him, but there are a lot of people who are just like, Gawain is the worst. I mean, I sent you that video of Generic Entertainment's how Wheel of Time fans recommend the Wheel of Time. And one of the things that he says is there are characters that are so bad, not in a you love to hate them kind of way, but you're furious that the author even included them. And then he just turns to the camera and goes, I'm talking about Gawain. But yeah. To expand on that point a little bit, I do think that wanting to be a white knight and like wanting to protect our women is a form of misogyny. Not to say that like hitting women or domestic violence is actually feminist,
right?
But,
yeah, both are like.
I'm a feminist. I torture women too.
But
both equally put men above women.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
In some way.
If it was truly egalitarian, that notion wouldn't even be there. And now Jordan is raised in the 40s and 50s. Like, this is in him in a certain way. But I do also want to bring up the fact that I think a lot of the reason that he is so desperate to protect women in his writing is because of this, which is asked in 1994, and trigger warning for, like, real-world violence against women in the Vietnam War. Asked in 1994 whether the scene owed anything to his military experience, Jordan replied that it did. I suppose, actually, that particular thing came from the one time I was really shaken in combat by shooting at someone, or shooting at somebody. I was shooting back at some people on a sampan, and a woman came out and pulled out an AK-47, and I didn't hesitate about shooting her. And that stuck with me. I was raised in a very old-fashioned sort of way. You don't hurt women, you don't do that. That's one thing that stuck with me for a very, very long time. Again, I think in some ways the Wheel of Time is him working through his own trauma that leads him to these sorts of ideas.
That actually is a very interesting conclusion.
Yeah.
I can see that like sticking with like somewhat like just that like cocktail of experiences, like the way he was raised combined with that event. I can see that having a big impact on how he chooses to write.
And apparently Jordan is like not proud of the things he did at Vietnam. Like one of he has a long thing about how his nickname in Vietnam was Iceman, because apparently he was the guy who Rand describes himself as having the void, where he goes into the void and suddenly everything is clear, combat is easy. Jordan talks about this as the zone in his own writing, of like, when I get into the zone, like it feels like you can do anything. He talks about that, like when he was in the zone, his fellow soldiers would call him Iceman, and he's like, oh, I hate what I've become.
That's actually really interesting. No, I mean, I won't say it's an uncommon motivation when writing to kind of almost want to put ideals or actions into characters you're writing that you wish you were able to do. And so I can very much see the writing of Rand as like the person he wished he could have been, like the type of person that would have been able to get through that scenario differently than he did.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And another thing Jordan says is, like, in order to return to the United States and not be insane, he says he describes it as having to kill that part of himself in order to return to the United States, is kill the part of him that was the Iceman. Because that guy was not made to survive in a civilian environment.
Something loose, Theron.
Yeah.
That is actually
and again,
a fascinating
biography.
Yeah.
Yeah, biography is not the answer everywhere, but it's something that we want to include because it is often illuminating. And particularly with someone who, even if he died tragically young, did so much in his life. That's a real fucking downer place to take to this episode. But
yeah, I'm trying to backtrack and think about. I had a point that I wanted to say, but I lost it, about growing up in the 50s and being a white knight for women.
What you're thinking?
Yeah,
is there any?
know.
Yeah.
I think I lost it.
Well, we still have a little bit more we can cover. The other thing is we could play my game.
Oh, right.
Sure.
It's not a particularly complicated game. Let me find...
Which, for listeners, Graham has refused to elaborate to us so far what this game is beyond.
Yes.
Like a very little bit.
So, again, to introduce this game, this was introduced to me by a teacher when I was still before college, sometime in high school or middle school, I don't remember. But one of the things that she brought up is like how to identify good or bad character writing within your own writing and within other people's writings. And the audience may recognize this from the Red Letter Media review of The Phantom Menace, where they use this strategy. I would like us to take a second and describe different characters from all the media we've engaged with, but we aren't allowed them to describe them using their appearance or their profession. To use this first example, we're going to use Sazed. I would like you to describe Sazed without describing what he looks like or describing his profession as a keeper. Now, you can use things that are related to his profession. Like you could say he's protective, but you wouldn't be able to say he is a guardian.
Okay. I mean, I would say a very passive person who often is frustrated with their own passivity. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
I think he's intelligent and logical.
Mm-hmm. I would say he has a deep love for the people around him and for his people. Keep going.
I
want to hear as much as you got.
He is someone interested in... He is someone that is very accepting of differences and different cultures and different beliefs or different modes of being.
Absolutely. And he's both kind of atheist and also deeply religious. He has a deep value in religion. He's
not afraid to go against the status quo and has a very strong sense of right and wrong that he adamantly believes in.
Absolutely. He's also very funny.
True.
Like, he has a sense of humor that is sort of absent for many of the other characters. And he also, like, he has a sense of heart to him that I think is really present of, like, again, that scene where asked about Kelsier, what would he say to us? He'd tell us to laugh more.
He's someone who's incredibly introspective, incredibly interested in interrogating his own thought process, his own beliefs.
I think that's a good spot for... We have a lot about Sazed there. Please now do the same thing. You cannot describe his profession or job or what he looks like for Rand al'Thor.
He's angry.
Yeah, I was going to say temperamental.
Stoic.
He is... what's the word I'm thinking of? He is someone who believes that he must be the person to solve the problem. He takes on the responsibility for everyone and the whole world onto himself. Mm-hmm. That was definitely an impression I got.
You now see the game.
Saying he has magic powers counts as his profession.
It does. It does count his profession.
He,
you know what? Hates hurting women. Feminist kink.
Yeah, he believes in... He believes in the... He used to believe in the sanctity of life.
And maybe returns to it at the end.
Maybe. We guess we're going to have to read the next one to see if that's true.
Unfortunately, we will have to read the next one to figure out if this is true.
Okay.
He doesn't trust himself. He doesn't think that what's going on in his own head is actually happening.
No, he does. Everyone else doesn't. Because he thinks Luz Theron is real. Because Luz Theron knows things that he doesn't.
But he also doesn't think he's real.
Yeah. I mean, they do have the interaction where Rand goes, "Are you real?" And Luz Theron basically goes, "No, you. Are you real, Rand?" Okay, so you're starting to see a little bit of the game. Please, without describing what he looks like or his profession, describe the character of Perrin Ibarra.
I don't know. I skipped half his chapters.
Without
truly
his appearance,
gun
or
to
his
my
profession.
head.
He
Grain
is a wife guy.
Grain of Sanderson.
He is a wife guy. I know that.
Yes.
He's the kind of guy who is humble enough to get in the mud and do what needs to get done.
Oh, he is very irreverent. I got the impression that he was very irreverent towards status.
I would say he's
wrong.
irreverent towards his own status.
Irreverent towards his own status, yeah. Very anxious. He seemed to be... I mean, the one bit of story we got about him was him being very, like... He saved his wife, but, like, things aren't the same, and him being very anxious about that.
Oh, he was that guy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I would like to point out that saving his wife is, like, his plot for 3 books.
So he's kind of bad at saving his wife.
He's bad at saving his wife. He's a wife.
No, it just takes him 3 books to do it.
He's an incompetent wife guy. He's aspiring.
Also, fun fact about Perrin Ibarra, he and his wife is 16, and he is like 20 when they meet, and they get married within 2 months of knowing each other.
So, wait.
He's...
And Robert Jordan isn't Mormon?
Nope, he's Catholic. Actually, I think he's Episcopal.
Yeah, he's Episcopalian. I had to look it up for a joke.
Okay. Word. If that's what you want.
So, yeah, you have all that. But, like, okay, I could keep going. I could keep going back and forth with other characters, but this is sort of my point of, like, it is harder to describe these characters. And granted, I was picky with Perrin, of, like, he does not get a ton of characterization in this book, but I don't think Jordan's character writing, or Sanderson's for that matter, is actually that strong. And also, the other thing that I'll mention, this is more character than Perrin has in the previous books.
Oh God, that's just sad.
I would actually, like, I think that's something that might show your point even more, is trying to be like, what's the difference between describe Egwene and then describe any of the other Aes Sedai.
Describe Egwene, then describe like Nynaeve or whatever her name is, and then describe Cadswain. Like,
or describe Elaine, even though she doesn't appear in this book. She's very similar. Or Aviendra. What's Aviendra's character?
Down bad for Rand.
It's funny because Lae'zel is the character I thought of in terms of comparison for doing this exercise for her. But like, yeah, it's mostly horny for Rand and violent. She does not have a ton of characterization. Or if you wanted to use a different character other than Lae'zel, you could say Chani from Dune, because Aviendra is essentially Chani from Dune.
I only watched the movie.
That's fine. Honestly, she has more character in those movies than she does in the book.
Oh no, that's actually my favorite part about the movies, is how they did Chani.
I have problems with those movies, but they're very impressive. They cut a lot of my favorite stuff out of Dune, though.
Interesting.
So that's my point of just like, I understand why people are engaged to these characters, but also there's not a lot there. But
like, isn't that like there's a lot of like conversation going around with Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses and Harry Potter, where the less that world building makes sense, it seems the more fandom has room to kind of flourish. 'Cause like,
yeah,
you want to go and like fix Harry Potter and explore the interesting things that are poorly explored, whereas like truly, what is there to explore in the Hunger Games that isn't
already filled in for you?
Yeah, that's like, because the world building's good.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I can see where there's like a fandom here because there's so little given to the audience that fandom will want to go and fill in all the gaps of Perrin and Rand and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And like, I think the other thing that Mass and J.K. Rowling are good at, obligatory fuck J.K. Rowling, but the things that they're good at is character writing. Granted, there are problems with both of the depictions of character writing, but like, I think Rowling fundamentally understands that if you have 3 really strong main characters who have great chemistry, you can get away with a lot of bullshit. If you're a good writer in some regards, you can get away with a lot of stuff that sucks. Or if you're a really good writer, you can get away with a message in your work that really, really sucks. If you're a really, really good artist, you can get away with some really bad thinking.
But, I mean, even that being said, though, haven't we just been talking about Robert Jordan's writing and how painful it is? Like,
yeah.
What is he getting away with?
I don't know. Actually, let's see. Let's see what AO3... Let's see what Wheel of Time has on AO3.
The cult of Robert Jordan has gotten away with.
Let's see. Okay, 2,000 works in Wheel of Time.
That's not that many.
No.
Maybe this isn't like the series ended before AO3. It was like, well, if it was actually...
It's also just different communities. Like, there just might not be as much overlap behind, like, the type of community that writes fan fiction and the type of community that's, like, big fans.
Yeah.
There's also an additional 1,500 works of the Wheel of Time TV show. God, I fucking love fan fiction. The first one I open is a fan fiction called Golden Blue, which is a crossover between the Wheel of Time and Red Dead Redemption. That's fucking sick.
Interesting.
Why not? Okay, do we have any other points we want to hit? Let me check my notes.
There are 1,675 works on AO3 for Stormlight Archive.
Again, not a ton, because Sanderson's work is exceptionally complete.
Right.
But that's actually a thing I've thought about because, you know, I'm really involved in, like, writing communities. I have a lot of friends that are writers and all that stuff. But I just never had a fan fiction phase. And in no way is that disparaging. I'm not trying to be disparaging to fan fiction at all. I think it's really cool that people are doing this. I just personally, in my own creative writing, never had a phase where I was pulled towards writing works in another author's world that I enjoyed with their characters. And I think a reason for that is a lot of my favorite works growing up were these works that are very complete, were things like Stormlight Archive, Hunger Games, all that stuff, which were just like what would I write about in a Stormlight Archive fan fiction? Like that's like oh, like I could write like little slice of life scenes, but that's not what I want. That's not the type of stories I want to write. I want to write like big fantasies where they're solving some big problem.
I think that's sort of part of one of the interesting things about Sanderson is I don't think his perspective of the fact that Warbreaker is the only book so far where like characters could just have a conversation in a restaurant could happen, I think is interesting of like that. But I think the other thing is we were genuinely considering doing a bonus episode where we did the Mistborn tabletop game. And I think part of the reason we didn't end up doing it is I can't imagine being a person with superpowers in the setting of Mistborn and not being one of the main characters. And like the canon is so adhered to in Sanderson's work, it feels weird to do something outside of canon. It's not a J.K. Rowling situation where it's like, oh, you can so easily imagine yourself in the background as a character at Hogwarts or something like that.
Yeah.
Like what? Like we would be like a heist crew also full of like Mistborn and Furikamists in some other city doing a heist? Like,
yeah. Or even if you do it for, I mean, maybe for the second era of Mistborn.
Second era would not be that hard, actually. But we'll get to that. Second era has a lot more, like, it's just like the story of the second era is just like a thing happening in this world. At least for the first couple books.
I think Sanderson's also, one of his main goals is to explore very deeply magic systems and the implications of things.
Yeah.
Whereas, like...
Which is what drew me to the books, is the that element of discovery, that element of like, here's magic, and guess what? You're going to spend the whole book learning that the magic does not work the way as it was initially presented.
Right. And these, like, what draws people to fan fiction as well are ships and wanting their own ships, whereas I think that Sanderson is so bad at romance. There's no room for crack ships or any, like, or like, well, there's room for some crack ships, but like genuine ships, I should say, like where people should have ended up with someone else, are just like not a thing.
Yeah, for fans of Sanderson who engage in this part of his community, this fanfiction part of his community, please write in, because I would be really interested to talk to you or email back and forth with you guys, because I remember I encountered someone who was listening to the podcast and they were like, it's weird to hear you guys describe them, these characters, how they're actually written, because now so much of what I think of them is my headcanon for these characters. And this person was like, I think of Vin as genderqueer. And
I can see that reading.
Bisexual.
I can see that reading 100%.
Absolutely. I don't think it's in the text, but I can see that reading. This person specifically said, so much of like my community has taken these characters away from Sanderson. Mm-hmm. Which, again, I think is fascinating because, much like J.K. Rowling, like, he is his brand so distilled down of, like, it's hard to extricate him from his books. Especially when, like, he has a podcast where he talks about them weekly. That sort of thing.
There is, I will say, like, the one thing I'm, like, the one bit of the fandom, like, fan and community I'm familiar with is actually some of the shipping cult. There's actually a decent amount of mainstream Sanderson fandom shipping culture surrounding Stormlight Archive, at least far more so than, like, any of his other books. Like I don't see any shipping culture that's, like, mainstream and common in people talking about Mistborn. But shipping is a mainstream conversation in Stormlight Archive.
I'm excited to talk about the fan fiction for that series. I really want to read the AUs.
I'm reading some of the tags on some of the works under Stormlight Archive, and it's, whew.
Okay, let me see show only crossovers for the Wheel of Time.
While we're looking at this, I don't think that this should be in our big like our own personal lists of our book rankings.
It's at the bottom if it is.
I don't know.
This book is in a unique scenario. Like we talked about at the beginning, where, like, yes, it's a Brandon Sanderson book, but it's a Brandon Sanderson book where he is trying to complete the work of another author as that person would have written, as his, like, stated goal. Which honestly, that yeah. I feel like there could also be just a lot of interesting conversation about that. Like, how would you do that? That's actually a really interesting challenge to talk about. But it does make it kind of complicated to, like, rank it against his other work, because none of his other work was constrained in this way.
Yeah, I don't think we should ever leave it, like I said for the short stories, I don't think we should leave it in the rankings, but it would be interesting to talk about where it would be. I'm kind of torn, because what's worse, like apathy or like active hatred? Because, like, I actively hated Well of Ascension, but, like, I'm very apathetic to The Gathering Storm. Like, I don't know if apathy is better than active hatred.
I mean, I'm just thinking, for me, like, I'm just thinking in terms of ease of getting through. Like, obviously, there's a lot I didn't like about... I'm not as actively hateful towards Will of Ascension as you guys are, and I recognize a lot of that is bias and nostalgia. Is just because, like, I am being...
You read it when it was a teen.
Yeah, I am biased by the fact that it's one piece of a greater whole that I'm generally a big fan of. That's definitely bias, but also, like, it was hard. It wasn't hard for me to get through Well of Ascension. It was hard for me to read this book because I was so bored. So in terms of a pure reading experience, I am way more likely to reread Well of Ascension as part of a greater Mistborn reread than I am ever to look at this book again. My general experience with this book was just boredom. And disappointment. I was like, I felt like I was back in high school and middle school, where you had a reading assignment, like a book report due for a book you could not care less about, but were like getting through this book.
Yeah,
which I didn't feel with any of the other books.
I would put this at the bottom. I mean, And I don't even think that's necessarily because this book is particularly bad. I can't separate this from the rest of the Wheel of Time. Especially with, not to bring up the election on our fucking fantasy book podcast, but like, having the results of that and this book being so unbelievably bleak that events are fundamentally recurring and a better world is not possible. I don't know how you could read The Wheel of Time and believe anything else about Randland. People always say this is a hopeful series to me, and it's like, that the worst can be prevented is like the thesis of this book, but like we're always doomed to this perpetual cycle of violence. That's so unbelievably bleak to me. And if that is the thesis of this book, I cannot believe that in good consciousness. Like, a better world is possible.
All of the success, the heroism, the struggles, the everything Rand is going through that might be successful, hopeful, and heroic, some other guy is going to have to do again 3,000 years from now. Is the Wheel of Time. That's
yeah. And that's the thing that I can't stand about it. For all the other things that we talked about, I'd be willing to set that aside if it had a less bleak core, but it doesn't.
Man, this would be such a better book if the pattern was like the villain. But
it's interesting to see, because in my own personal life, I like to read tarot cards, and it's interesting to see how one-to-one the pattern in the Wheel of Time is to the Wheel of Fortune. And the Wheel of Fortune is a tarot card about the wheel turns, and sometimes kings become paupers, and sometimes paupers become kings. That's the Wheel of Time. Like, that's the Wheel of Fortune, is that, like, fate can sometimes be random and fortune falls and can be taken away quickly. There's elements of that where, like, that kind of, like, the wheel turns, life will go on, but fundamentally things will change, and where you were standing on top of the wheel, you find yourself at the bottom of the wheel. And I don't wish that's like, but that's like kind of, I guess, my background that I brought into this book, that I was surprised to find some elements of that in this, and also surprised to find such a deep misreading of, like, this kind of wheel archetype in past mythologies.
Like the Wheel of Fortune is that, like, the thing that will be eternal is that the wheel will keep turning and change will continue to happen.
Yeah. The Wheel of Fortune is that when you're on the bottom, things are going to go back up. Like, you're not going to be at the bottom forever.
Yeah. And like, that is a much more hopeful idea to me, of like, there is room for the new in the Wheel of Fortune, and there's no room for the new in the Wheel of Time.
Yeah, in the pattern.
And again, there are moments of brilliance here. In this book, in the whole series, there's a scene that I will probably think about for, like, a long time. There's a scene where Matt first gets his ability to be profoundly lucky. And when he understands this ability, it's some of Jordan's best writing. It's really spooky. He has, specifically, people describe him as having the Dark One's own luck. And there's a real sinister cast to this. He escapes from the White Tower and spends, like, the night gambling, and it's, like, coded as if it's an addiction, but he can't stop winning. He almost kills someone during this night of gambling, and he realizes, like, oh, I'm not fully in control of who I am. And I was like, that's so sick. I can't wait to see this pay off. And then it doesn't. Do we have any other final thoughts, or should I read our emails?
I think we can move to email.
Okay.
There's an element to recording this podcast where it's like, we might be capable of coming up with more things to say, but then there's also just the pure stamina aspect of it.
Absolutely. So this first email is from a while ago, but we didn't read it on the podcast, and I definitely want to make sure this gets read. This is from CJ. Hi, Beachcombers. I listened to the Warbreaker episode yesterday at work, and you've absolutely sold me on reading this book. I'd like to give special thanks to Taylor for headcanoning so many characters as bisexuals. Bisexuals everywhere, me, are loving this. I don't have much money. If you guys started a Grain of Sanderson Patreon, I'd definitely pledge a few dollars a month to y'all. For now, I wanted to let you know that I've enrolled back in school for this fall, taking more undergraduate classes to convert my degree from science to the humanities in advance of grad school. I've wanted to do this for years, and I credit your podcast as one of the reasons I'm making it happen.
Aww.
Hearing some very smart people my age discuss fantasy books in an intelligent and accessible way is inspirational, and so you've had a positive impact in at least one listener, and probably others too. Due to my new institutional access, I was also able to download the Alcatraz and Eisner article that you recommended a couple months back, which was a really interesting read, so thanks for that too. Hope you're all doing well, but especially Jack's cat, CJ.
Oh, thank you so much. That's
I said this to CJ
so nice to hear
in an email reply, but hearing that we sent someone back to school as someone whose highest ambition is to teach is the highest possible compliment.
That is really, yeah. And from my end, my cat is doing very well. I got her a new type of treat that she likes a lot more than the last one, and I'm definitely giving her too many.
Beautiful.
So...
As is her right.
As she deserves.
As she deserves.
As she deserves.
We have one more email, this one from Josh. Hi, Beachcombers. I am unfortunately unable to follow along with reading the Wheel of Time books with y'all. My only brush with it was when a boy in a college folklore cast gave it to me in what I presume was an advanced form of flirting, and I couldn't get past the first chapter. Excited to listen all the time.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
It's a very special feeling. Special derogatory feeling. When there's someone that you like really like, have a crush on, or like are developing feelings for, and you learn that their favorite media is a type of media you can't stand.
I mean, like, there are plenty of people I am friends with who love the Wheel of Time, and we can still be friends. You could get around this.
It's a struggle, but you know.
Here we go. My question is, if Brandon Sanderson dies tragically early or just decides to retire and pass the Stormlight archive off to another author, who would you nominate to finish the series? I'll have Brandon's own work on the Wheel of Time. If you feel like you can't answer this for the Stormlight books, what if another author had to finish the back half of Alcatraz? Who would you want to see in that pilot's chair? Thank, Josh.
The thing,
I think I would do it. I'll take it on.
You know what? I would love to see that.
I think
I'll do it.
I think
I'll die on the sword.
I
know. You can clap.
So proud of you.
I think my honest reaction is it's really hard to answer because, as Graham has put so eloquently often, Brandon Sanderson is his work. Like he and his personality are so tied to the work he does on such a big level. And I think my honest answer is I kind of hope it's someone I don't know. Like my honest answer is I kind of hope it's somebody given the same chance Sanderson was with Wheel of Time to get their start in fantasy and put their own spin on it. Graham, you're far more well read than I am, so you also have like a much greater cast of authors to maybe pull upon.
Yeah.
But I think that's my honest answer. Is I think my best case scenario is it's someone I haven't heard of that's being given a chance to like really show off by doing so.
I would say my two answers, apart from Taylor, who is obviously the best person to take up the job. I would say the two authors who I think could do it is Fonda Lee, who he won the Hugo a couple of years ago for her trilogy, The Green Bone Saga, which I think is doing a lot of the same sort of world building as Sanderson, but it's much more rooted in like the materialism than the world than Sanderson is. There's a lot more of like people hanging out and just that sort of vibe to it. I think she would do a really good job of finishing the Cosmere. Granted, I don't know if she would want to. I think that's absolutely within her wheelhouse. The other person I would say is Hiromu Arakawa, who wrote Full Metal Alchemist. I think she could totally finish the Cosmere as a manga, and I think she would do a fantastic job of it.
I have an additional funny answer. George R.R. Martin as punishment. He is given that assignment. You must complete the Stormlight Archive.
Honestly, just let George go. It's fine.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of small, maybe don't have their super break yet, but also have had a successful series. Like that's what I'm trying. Like that's kind of what I'm trying to find, I guess. Indie author I super duper loved this year, and I loved their book. Trying to find. It's called Daughter of No Worlds.
Carissa Broadbent?
Yes. So this is an indie. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's an indie published book series. It's like high fantasy, and I was blown away. I like swept away. Loved this book. Had no idea what to expect going in, and I love Daughter of No Worlds. I'm on the third book now. I will say it's a trilogy, and I have not finished the third book, but I've been so blown away by the first two books that I would highly, highly recommend them. And I think that's the only one that I have off the top of my head who fits the description I was thinking of, that has successfully written a really good fantasy series, but maybe doesn't necessarily have their big break.
I had another thought. I can't go into too much detail because that might be spoiling Stormlight a little bit. But once again, I'm coming from a much smaller list of possible authors to pull from. But I think N.K. Jemisin would be really interesting, mostly because there are themes in Stormlight Archive that I think she would do a really good job tearing apart and making interesting.
Yeah, I would be...
Like, if she took the wheel from Sanderson on some certain themes that come up in Stormlight Archive...
Well,
I think that could be fascinating.
It would be interesting. I should reread her stuff that she wrote before she wrote the Broken Earth trilogy, because those are more traditionally high fantasy. But I will say, we've already seen what an N.K. Jemisin run at a Sanderson book looks like. The Broken Earth trilogy is, I mean, on some level, in conversation with Mistborn.
Not a bad read. No.
And... like, I think if we get her run at something like that, it looks wildly different in that sort of way.
Yeah.
In terms of a person that would finish it in the way Brandon finished Wheel of Time, in the sense where it's like someone who would make a really good, honest effort at finishing it the way he probably, like, on the track he was on, I'm not sure. I do think Sanderson is, at least... once again, I think I'm the least well-read of us three in terms of, like, breadth of books read. To the authors I've read, he has a pretty unique style.
I know, and I think there's something to be said that Sanderson wasn't probably the most ideal pick for Robert Jordan. He just happened to kind of...
should have been Terry Goodkind. Anyway.
The one? Like...
Yeah.
I mean, it does seem to be sort of by happenstance.
There's no perfect choice.
But also, in many ways, I'm glad it's Sanderson, because I don't know if anyone else could have done this. There are other authors who are physically capable of doing it, but I think, like, he had the specific skills at the specific time, not to perfectly do it, but to get it done. And
yeah,
I have a lot of sympathy for authors who overscope and feel unable to deliver on the next book. One of the things that we heard from the authors of The Expanse is they were talking to their friend Carrie Vaughn, and Carrie Vaughn said, hey, this is going to be huge. This is going to be wildly popular. You need to have book 2 done before book 1 comes out. And if you don't do that, it's going to ruin you. And she was absolutely right.
Yeah.
Also, huge shout out to Carrie Vaughn. Her book Kitty in the Midnight Hour fucking rules. Her book Bannerless also fucking rules. Incredible author, and I feel like she's undervalued.
That actually just gave me a thought. Literally, Brandon Sanderson is the one capable of writing thousands of pages of fan fiction of his favorite work at a very high standard.
Yeah.
That's effectively what these 3 books are. Like, he's a huge fan of Wheel of Time. He was a huge fan, and he basically did like a finishing an unfinished series fan fiction. And someone who is incredibly dedicated, disciplined writer at writing fan fiction, capable of writing thousands of words a day, even when on a tight, strict schedule, our friend Sarah.
Yeah.
Except there will be so much more sex in the books if she does.
I mean, that's one of the sort of interesting things is I do think tapping a fan fiction author to finish something would be interesting. Like, for example, my answer to this for A Game of Thrones, Naomi Novik. Right now, 100%. If George R. Martin wanted to, he could retire and Naomi Novik would finish Game of Thrones.
Can and would.
Not only because she's capable of doing that, because she's already done it. One of her most popular fan fictions is an ending to Game of Thrones. Granted, hers is a wildly different AU, and like a lot of different choices are made. It's much like more interested in the sex and relationships of Game of Thrones, even though that is obviously one of Martin's interests. But she could totally do that. Anyway, we're kind of losing the thread here.
Regardless, I think
let's wrap
we're
up.
running out of steam.
No, that was from an email. That was from a.
So thank you again, Josh and
let's
CJ,
wrap
for
up.
writing in.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Those are great questions and life updates, I guess. Like, thank you so much.
Best part of doing this is, well, first best part is that it's an excuse to hang out with two of my best friends in the whole world on a regular basis. Second best thing is what we hear from listeners.
Yeah, genuinely, it really keeps us going. Also, we had someone write in saying like, hey, I would love to be a guest on a specific episode to talk to you about how Sanderson writes this thing. That was really nice to hear at that time. It's just, and that is something we are probably going to do. I think for the coming short story episodes, I think we're going to have a different guest for each of those.
Yeah.
One of them will be Brandon Sanderson himself.
God, if we ever get there, that'd be insane.
Oh my God. Brandon would prove himself a very humble man were he to enthusiastically participate in this podcast where we are incredibly critical of his writing.
I don't think like ethically it would be a good idea to have him on a main episode, but if he ever wanted to come on for a Q&A, I would be really interested.
Yeah, what we're doing is for readers.
Yeah.
We're not doing this for
I didn't mean like he comes in and joins in on the criticism. I mean just him being like listening to our podcast and then being like, yeah, I want to be on that. That's more what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that we're doing we uphold his work with a lot of integrity. It's just because we're I think by criticizing it, we hold it to a very high esteem.
Yeah. I'm really excited to talk about The Way of Kings, not just because I think this is like where Sanderson emerges fully formed, is for better and worse. And I think it'll be really interesting to talk about.
And that episode will be coming out very close to the release of Book 5 of Stormlight Archive.
Jack is going to suffer close to the torture that I suffered in reading all of the 14 of the Wheel of Time books, 15, whatever, in not being able to read the 5th book immediately when it comes out.
Because I have to read Way of Kings, which I was already going to reread, but not too quickly so that it's still fresh in my head when we record that episode. But also I then want to then reread the rest of Stormlight so I can read the 5th book when it comes out. But this is all during the month that we are probably going to be trying to read the next Wheel of Time book.
Yep.
And I'm in law school, so I don't have free time. It is actually going to be middle of winter break, so who knows?
All right. Thank you so much for listening, folks. We will be back here next month with The Way of Kings. Until then,
grab a book
and hit the beach.
Grab a book and hit the beach. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
A Grain of Sanderson is created by Graham Gilman, Taylor Lane, and Jack McLaughlin. I edit and produce the show. Our logo is by our very talented friend Ven Busby. Our theme music is Goodnight Kiss by Too Mellow off the album Midnight Broadcasts. You can find their work at twomellow.net, that's the number 2, MELLO, and twomellow at bandcamp.com. If you'd like to support the Beachcombers further, you can do that in the following ways. First, please tell your friends about this podcast. Sharing the pod in a Discord, writing a thoughtful post on social media, or otherwise telling your friends really helps us out. You can also support us by following us on social media. Taylor works very hard on our Instagram. Or by buying a book from our bookshop, of which we see a small cut. Both those links are in the episode description. Questions, critiques, encouragement? Please write us an email at agrainofsanderson@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening.
This series is a long casting of a necromancy spell that sucks the lifeblood out of you slowly.
At least for me.
I know we haven't officially started, but I hope, Graham, you cut just that quote from Taylor out.
This whole series is Robert Jordan's phylactery.
What?
I got that licher phylactery. Lichers love phylacteries.
Aloy wants to be part of the podcast.
She's dangerously close to your keyboard.
Yeah, no. The other day I was actually playing Helldivers, and Aloy like laid herself on my desk, so part of her was on the keyboard, and I had the fun experience of continuing to try and like fight while Aloy, and I didn't want to shove her off, but while Aloy was like pushing random buttons. So I was like trying to play Helldivers where I would suddenly start walking to the right instead. Helldivers has a weird vibe right now. I keep checking the like Reddit because I want to know if like any big lore stuff happened, but like it's the community for Helldivers is getting so toxic and annoying.
Yeah, they're not great.
Just getting very whatever. I don't know. I just want to.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, Jack. I think it will be better in a month, because I don't think we, as a culture, understand the service that Call of Duty Zombies does for the world. Because here is the great importance of Call of Duty Zombies. Call of Duty Zombies is the fun.
Don't worry about it. You're
Call
stepping
of Duty
in
Zombies
mid-conversation.
is the funnel for the worst people in the world to play their video games. The worst people in the world play Call of Duty Zombies, and there wasn't a Call of Duty Zombies last year. There's going to be one this year. And I think we'll see a measured drop in all these horrible online players when they go to Call of Duty Zombies, because currently they're playing Helldivers because they're like, I need something, I need a horde shooter, and I will be toxic.
Our shit was on 68. Of course I was freezing. I put it on 72.
Oh yeah, that's because I turned it down last night.
Why?
Because
It wasn't.
I was hot last night. It's freezing. And I literally had a thought. I was like, I think Taylor's gonna complain about this in the morning.
Yeah, that's true.
If I was in charge, my thermostat would be at
Right,
65.
You're
but I'm
crazy.
not.
Yeah, probably
You're
same.
crazy. You're crazy. I'm freezing. It's 68.
I was told my temperature regulation would change on HRT, and it hasn't. Like, I'm still constantly running too hot.
Interesting. I haven't heard that one.
Yeah.
Because you get less blood.
What? Where?
That's genuinely it. Like it's
Well,
it's when you go on HRT, you have less blood.
Okay, well, this may be I know where my blood's going. Where's your blood
It's actually
going?
not because it's not actually
ignorant.
because of that. I actually had a little weird deep dive on this. It's people think it's because of that. It's not. It's unreal. It just has to do with like how feminine hormones like have you like create and regulate and recycle blood. That like a woman of the same body mass as a man will have less blood.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And there are a bunch of weird
that's
side
actually-
effects. I'm less strong now, but I have way more endurance now. Like, I can't lift things that are as heavy, but I can lift them for longer.
How's your pain tolerance? Does that change?
That hasn't changed, as far as I can tell. I mean, I have a pretty big tattoo coming up, so I guess that would be a good place to measure.
Fair.
But I don't think it's changed.
Will that change? Is that something that people say change? Or no?
There are some people who say that's changed. I mean, there's a lot of different things that like different people experience. Like, for example, a lot of trans women say they can, like, their color perception is better.
Cool.
Yeah, and
I
like,
would have expected that something. I mean, yeah.
like meaningfully, and it's one of those things where it's like, really, I wouldn't have thought that, but I guess, sure.
Well, that makes sense because I do know that in general women have better color perception than men, and since like effectively we're all the same like blob at the beginning, and it is just the hormones that kind of then direct like how our stem cells then grow and develop. Like, I guess it would make sense to me.
Sure, but
that
someone on HRT is not
the human.
developing from stem
What I'm
cells.
learning is that what I'm learning every time I learn more about HRT is that the human body is way more plastic and way more flexible, even at this stage of your life, than I ever would have imagined.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, HRT makes you grow breasts.
Mhm.
Like, it does. developmental things do like kick in even at this stage of life.
My body
Human
is a
bodies
science
are
experiment.
wild. Hell yeah. Oh, go on.
And one of the coolest scenes in this book is when Varen Sedai reveals that she's been a Dark One this whole time. And she reveals like one of the weaknesses of the Dark Ones. It's specific about the last hour of her death, so she can betray the Dark One in the last hour.
Like if she knows she's going to die in the next hour. Yeah.
Walton's
So she poisons
making
herself.
food. It's gonna be really loud if I need to wait this out.
Okay.
Are you
Walton,
done?
you monster.
And now he has his headphones on. Are you done?
The patriarchy striking again.
Okay, well, are you gonna use the microwave again? Okay. We're back.
It's all right. I mean, I can edit around that.
Well, I muted it for as much as I could, but I couldn't respond.